Welcome to Analytics Unleashed, our annual event for those of you who are engaged, like me, or compelled to try to understand the power of analytics. Arthur C. Clarke, the writer who created 2001, A Space Odyssey, and the book of the same name, he once said, "Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic." And that single quote best describes my love affair with analytics. It reflects the combination of both aspects of the human mind. There's the logical side of us. It's focused on science, on data, and on engineering. It's a curious and it's an analytical mind. And it's driven by logic and looking to solve complex problems. But there's another side of the human mind. That side is less concerned with logic. It sees and imagines potential, possibilities. And knowing that that understanding is imperfect, knowing that our reach exceeds our grasp, that side of the human mind marvels at magic and the magic that we can create. And that's how I feel about data. I'm literally of two minds. When I watched Star Trek as a kid, I confess, even in the remake, I didn't identify with James Kirk or Spock. I wanted to be them both. And my love affair with analytics percolated throughout my career in IT. I learned every system, not through the technology or the structures. I learned it from the data. The way it was stored, the way it was transformed in there. And the idea, the magic of how it could be used. I was hired by a financial institution way back in the days of data warehouses. And I was going to do a project for their data warehouse. What a project that was. And some of the people in the room may know about that sort of thing. On one hand, we had the IT department, okay, and they hired me. And they were concerned with data structures, performance, and ultimately, the cleanliness and the reliability of the data in the system. That was their big thing. Then there was a group of mathematicians, the early data scientists, that the business had hired. And they were concerned with rules, algorithms, mathematical theories, and all of that. But leading this group, there was someone who saw the magic. I was in his office on a whiteboard, and he patiently explained to me how credit scoring worked, and how even the slightest changes and tolerances in the model could vastly increase or vastly decrease the amount of money that was loaned. And even a minor change in this could mean the difference of tens of millions of dollars that could be loaned or not loaned. That had a huge impact on corporate earnings. Now, I was mesmerized. And in some ways, I was the best person to manage that project. I understood the technology, I understood the data structures, I had done conversions and designs for financial institutions. I'd taken the manual systems of financial companies, card records, and we'd taken them into the first digital databases. I knew what I was talking about. The point is, I knew everything and how that system should work. I totally appreciated the potential and the idea as a business idea as well. And I was a colossal failure. It just went down in flames. Why? Try as I might, I couldn't get the IT people to appreciate the beauty of the goal. I couldn't get the math wizards to understand the need for structure and process and all of those things that we needed to run a computer operating that gave us a stable computer environment. And then there were the executives. They just wanted the results. So despite my best efforts, they argued, they fought, they wrote memos, and we got nowhere. And here's what I learned from that experience. If we were ever to realize the potential of data and analytics, technical skills, be they IT, be they engineering, be they mathematics, statistics, these were necessary, but they weren't sufficient. And what was needed was an overriding goal, like one that we could pursue with relentless execution. And we would need the leadership to make sure we were all in pursuit of that goal. And If we had that, even if the goal was impossible, and if you've been in IT long enough, you'll know sometimes you get an impossible goal. Even if the goal was impossible, we'd find a way. And we'd find a way to make it happen. And to make that happen, I had to learn a whole new set of skills. I applied myself, I learned. Over the years, I got better and better at bringing the technical, the business, and the leadership together. Sometimes we'd even get the creative imagination, the storytellers. And if we had to bring them all together to achieve something that they couldn't do individually. And if you've done this long enough, you stumble, but sometimes we succeeded. And I never gave up. Bit by bit, inch by inch, step by step, I learned that progress in this area was never easy. I learned there would be setbacks, and I also learned there would be victories. Small victories. But even small victories add up, and they keep you on a path towards that goal. And I realized how important they were, those small victories along the way. And it's in that spirit that we created this event, Analytics Unleashed. Now, we wanted to create an event to inspire a community and to bring together people from all disciplines to find the magic, to get the results from analytics and analytics programs. These results can change businesses. They can have a profound impact on the corporate culture, and sometimes they can change our lives for the better. So, welcome to that dream. Today we're going to explore what is possible. We'll question the technical, we'll look at the personal, but we'll never lose sight of the goal. And the goal is to build something that looks like magic. And that brings us the results. So welcome to everybody in our studio audience here. Thank you so much for coming. And welcome to everybody across the country who's watching this on your computer screens, be in your office, your home, or wherever you are. We're going to have a number of presentations for you, sessions and panels that can help you understand how you can use the power of analytics. Or better stated, unleash the power of analytics in there. We'll look at the practical and the potential. Now, this is a hybrid event. We have a live audience, small live audience in our studio audience here in Toronto, and we're also broadcasting this coast to coast across the internet in there. That internet thing is going to catch on, by the way. Now, for those of you who are with us today in the audience, let me talk to the audience for a second here. The washrooms are down there, down the hall. If you need to take a call, there's a room 303 across the hall. Somebody from our staff or team will be here to assist you. And for the remote audience, I'm speaking to you from what we call the Jumbotron. That was named by one of our guys, design guys. It's the main viewing screen, and immediately to the right or underneath me, if you're on some screens, you'll see a chat box. Can you find that? Got it? You see the chat box? It's either on the right or down underneath my feet. Okay, so if you have a question and you want something you want to see question you want to pose to presenters or panelists, or you want to see a question you want to see in the discussion later, put it in the chat box. And why don't you test that now? Can you just test that now by putting something in the chat box? Share a few words or what you want to get out today. And you're also linked into all of the presenters who are here looking at their chat box. It's kind of a weird audience because they're all looking at their phones, but I know they're watching me, but it's the same thing. They're following you on chat too, so you can communicate with all the presenters as well. Now test that, okay, in there. Put in what most interests you, or just say hi. So your questions and a lot of other things that are interesting on the platform, check that out. There's downloads, there's material, and there's links to our award-winning podcast. There's Cybersecurity Today. There's #trending. Don't forget to subscribe in there. Okay. So you can use the chat to ask questions. You can have conversations or share comments. I'll be following it as much as I can. But if you hear something you want to share with a bigger audience, beyond this audience, use Twitter, that Twitter thing, #AnalyticsUnleashed, okay? Say nice things about Elon, though, okay? #AnalyticsUnleashed. And once again, we'll bring this all together to share our experiences online and in person. You'll be able to hear experts and practitioners and ask our questions, and that's it. This event, just like any analytics project, is going to be as good as we collectively make it. So ask questions, use the chat, tweet using hashtag #AnalyticsUnleashed, and let's move this forward. First, before we go on, thanks to all of you in our studio audience and out there for being with us. Thanks especially to KIPS, the Canadian Information Processing Society. They're coast-to-coast association of IT professionals. And thanks to KIPS and their members for their support. And if you want to find out more about them, go to kips.ca, you can see there. And a special thank you to our sponsors. I mean this sincerely, we could not do these types of events without the sponsors. Thank you to Informatica, thank you to SAS and Shiny Docs, and the people who've made this possible. So when they call you after this, say hi. You don't have to buy anything, but at least say hi and thank them for doing this. And now, our keynote speaker. Our keynote speaker is somebody I met at another conference, probably the first live conference we did, Kimberly Nevela. She's the Strategic Advisor and Advisory Business Systems Solution Manager for SAS. And yes, I had to read that from the teleprompter in there. I've spoken with Kimberly at conferences, and she's been a guest on my weekly podcast, hashtag Trending the Weekend Edition. I asked her to come in and set the stage to talk about the potential of analytics and to help us understand the barriers to progress and how we can achieve the potential. Kimberly, there's nobody better than Kimberly to do this. Welcome and come on up.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Jim. I appreciate the invite. And as Jim said, I had an opportunity to speak with him for his podcast last week, and it generated some thoughts I'll share with you today. So the title of our presentation here is a business imperative for data analytics and innovation. But what I really want to talk to you about is what are the common attributes and attitudes that organizations who are successful in adopting analytics broadly actually demonstrate. Now, I think it's probably fair to say that if I asked you quickly off the top of your head to jot down areas in your organization where analytics is being used, everybody could do that today with very little effort. Analytics is visible, it is increasingly understood, and increasingly core to a lot of our business practices. And the areas that you jotted down would include some common things like marketing and sales, risk and fraud, and then there would be a whole breadth of different operational areas specific to the industry and your specific function. Now, if we take that level of awareness and some general adaptation in the enterprise, and we add on the increasingly of late breathless headlines about things like AI that can generate art and can compose prose, and these headlines that are increasingly either concerned or excited, depending on their perspective, about AI and analytics' impact on every aspect of our lives, we would be forgiven for thinking that everything, everywhere, is coming up and dependent on analytics. And perhaps we wish that were so. The reality, however, is that for most organizations, the story's a little bit different. When we talk to companies broadly, regardless of their level of analytics maturity, most organizations will point to a lot of success in key areas. Again, in a lot of cases, they're areas or functions of the organization that may have always been more analytically inclined, sales, marketing, fraud, risk, et cetera, so on and so forth, and that those functions and lines of business have been increasingly successful in adapting ever more mature and advanced analytics capabilities and embedding those into their business processes. But almost all organizations still struggle to diffuse those analytic capabilities more broadly and evenly distribute them throughout the organization in areas that maybe were not historically as inclined towards data and analytics. And it's interesting, because when I had the chance to talk with Jim last week, he had mentioned a study. And he mentioned a study in which the percentage of companies that self-identified as data-driven has actually fallen over the last 3 years, consistently. And I started to think about, why is that? Is that because these companies have less data? Not likely. Is it because they're no longer using the analytics tools that they had before? Probably not. The real answer is probably that our definition of what it means to be data-driven is changing. Not so very long ago, if we asked ourselves, is your company data-driven, we would be looking for To what extent do your leaders, your business execs, consult things like business forecasts or data trends when they're making decisions? Today, however, if I asked, is your business data driven, you're much more likely to be thinking about, or what that would look like is hyperautomation. No decision left behind, by which I mean no decisions left to us fallible humans without some insight and input from the machine. And AI that is deployed everywhere. Again, this is simply not the reality in most organizations. And I don't want you and your compatriots to be discouraged by that. There's a new book out called The Power in Prediction. And the authors refer to the current moment in time as the between times. And what they point to is this gap between what we all understand to be the potential value of advanced analytics and AI and the value most organizations are actually getting from them today. Now, to be clear, we've made a lot of investments, both externally in the market and internally with companies. And I could spend a little bit of time going through those numbers, and we could talk about why those investments today may or may not have led directly to impacts in your organization. But I'm not going to do that, mostly because I think it's actually not that important. Your organization is where your organization is. And regardless of where that is, it is very likely that you are not alone on that particular corner. And every organization has the opportunity to improve and adapt and adopt analytics more mindfully and to drive value on a move-forward basis. So let's not worry too much about what's gone before. Let's think a little bit about what comes next. And to do that, I want to just touch briefly on 6, what I'm going to say, attributes or attitudes that organizations who do make a good use of analytics or are deploying analytics most pervasively display. Maybe not all of them, but a lot. And then through the course of the day, you're going to hear from companies that are actually putting some of these things into practice, and you'll understand how they're doing that in the real world. So the first element is that, and this is going to seem simple, but I think it's simply profound. Organizations that are able to use analytics and AI well focus on solving problems. Full stop, end of story. These organizations are also focused on solving a broad spectrum of problems. So they're applying analytics and AI to problems that are both big and small. And in fact, the companies that are most mature report that the balance between use cases that you might consider operational and those that are more strategic, so things that are focused on operational efficiencies versus creating new products or services, is about 50-50. So if we want to be an analytics sort of first company, that means that we are solving that broad spectrum of problems. But I think more importantly is that companies who do this well no longer think about and plan for their data and analytics strategy as separate from their business strategy. Instead, as they're thinking about what are the actions we need to take as a company or as an individual, what are the decisions I want to be able to make or need to make in the future, they are proactively thinking how and where can I apply data and analytics to improve that decision or outcome. And I have a really simple test for organizations if they're not sure if data and analytics are today integral to their business plans. And that is, go and take a look at whatever your company's version of the strategy on a page is, and everyone has it. If data and analytics don't have a spot on that page, if your data and analytics strategy is the appendix or a different page, you're not there yet. And we need to sort of concentrate on that. Okay, so the second thing that organizations that are deploying or unleashing analytics pervasively do is they use a broad spectrum of tools. Now, I already nattered on a little bit about the need to solve problems big or small. But the interesting thing here is that organizations that are most mature are the least inclined to be distracted by the new bright and shiny objects. They use the most simple, well-proven technique they can to solve any problem. And they do not spend a lot of time going back and re-architecting or redesigning something that already works just because there's a new method that could also work. So we might not take our old approach to forecasting and replace it with a machine learning model unless I can show a germane business impact and reason for doing that. Why do I bring that up? It's important because they are not spending a lot of time just retreading existing ground, but now they actually have the headspace to go out and find new analytics problems to solve in new areas of the business, because we're not just trying to make these incremental, potentially non-germane improvements in areas that are already doing pretty well. The other aspect of this is that they realize that the analytic tools and platforms are a means to an end. Now, there is no question that a lot of the low-code, no-code, citizen data scientists, you'll hear them referred to platforms, are very, very important, and they can get a lot more people in your organization developing insights, models, et cetera. It's extremely critical. But you should be under no illusion that the majority of your employees want to roll their own analytics. They don't, and they won't. And nor does their job or their function likely require them to moving forward. So I use the analogy, but this doesn't mean that they're not interested in doing better with insights and outcomes that a model could give them. It's just a little bit like a parent who hides the spinach in their kid's cheesy lasagna. They prefer that those insights are delivered to them in the context and in line of their existing business process flows and workflows, not as a separate tool. And organizations that assume that analytics and AI are going to be self-serve for everybody may find that analytics and AI are self-serve or used by nobody. Now, the third thing that organizations do is they invest incrementally and mindfully in infrastructure. And again, that analytics and data infrastructure strategy is closely tied to their operational and transactional infrastructure strategy. And what this looks like is companies that, for instance, yes, are early adopters to the cloud, but they're not running to lift and shift everything and every analytic workflow and all the data immediately to the cloud. They're being mindful about the analytic workloads that make sense and would benefit from the capabilities that are available on the cloud. It means that they invest in developing a robust blueprint for modern data pipelines, but they don't try to move every data stream onto it before people start using it. They prioritize those data streams based on the use cases and actual usage and value in the organization. It also means that we are proactive in identifying what is required to actually deploy an analytic model and maintain it in production while we were defining the problem up front, while we're defining the business requirements themselves, so that we don't get caught out at the back end of this process. And we can actually be proactive about bringing new practices, model ops, data ops, into the organization before they are needed. Fourth, education and knowledge. Organizations that, again, are showing the best response. There was an Art of AI Maturity study done by Accenture earlier this year. And in that study, only 12% of companies identified as what they called AI achievers. So these were companies that are deploying AI pervasively and in fact are showing immense returns from it. They could, on average, these companies are saying they can relate 30% of their revenue gains to their AI projects overall. I mean, that's a staggering amount. What I found really interesting was that 78% of those AI achievers have mandatory training for employees at all levels of their companies. Now, when we go and talk to companies about what does training look like, what is data and analytic literacy, we tend to default to thinking that this is about teaching people number sense, understanding statistics, maybe knowing how to use these tools, right? But probably the more important part is that we teach everybody in the organization to what I'm going to call analytic recognition, so that the people in your organization can actually know and identify the types of questions and the problem they can answer and the problems they can solve with analytics. Why is this important? It's important because it increases the surface area, if you will, of the number of people who can identify problems we can apply analytics to. And because these people are identifying problems they care about, it increases the likelihood that the solution will be adapted. Back to point number one, you have to solve a problem somebody cares about solving for adoption. Now, all of that being said, we have to acknowledge that the presence of analytics in an organization, the capabilities, the tools, in and of itself, does not guarantee that your organization's decision-making capabilities or overall intelligence is going to improve. In a somewhat, I thought, witty criticism of people who do not understand analytics and leaders who pretend to use data, Andrew Lang, different from Andrew Wang, has said he uses statistics like a drunk uses a lamppost for support and not illumination, right? And it sounds a bit like a joke. However, there was a recent study by Growth AQ, and in that study, 22% of the decision makers, only 22% of the decision makers that were surveyed said that they use the insights and data that are provided to them when they're making decisions. And those are insights and recommendations they asked for, and they're still not using them. So how do we solve that problem? We have good insight, we've got models, we've got good insight. How do we solve for behavior? Well, it turns out that we have to practice. Like so many other things, we have to develop the muscle and the skill in our organization to make good decisions using information. Frankly, I could probably use this in my day-to-day life as well. But what this means is that we are going to be very deliberate about identifying the decisions that we want to inform or make with analytics. And we are also going to define how we will make the decisions using the information that is provided. And then we're going to monitor the outcomes of those decisions. And as many of you may already know, we call this new practice, if you will, decision intelligence, or DI. Now, to be clear, the point of DI is not to eliminate human judgment. The point of DI is so that we are clear about how we apply the machine prediction. How will the human use that machine prediction when they are making a decision or making judgment? And what DI, didn't want to do that quite yet. What DI, this is what happens when I have things in both hands. What DI actually allows us to do is avoid this really common problem of, I'll know it when I see it. I'll know it when I see it if it's good enough for data and analytics. The other thing it does is it forces us to really think a bit about why somebody might not use or respond to the solution that we're developing in the way we expected that they would. So a simple example. We know, and you'll have seen this out there, that we can use computer vision and machine learning to read a mammogram, for instance. Now, there's some obvious questions. One is, how accurate does that machine learning model need to be before we can use it on real-life patients in real life? Decision intelligence requires us to answer that question before we start to develop the model. So we define a set goalpost, and it doesn't just sort of move willy-nilly. The other thing that it forces us to ask is, all right, if we can hit that level of accuracy, how will that machine output be integrated into a clinical workflow? Are we going to show every scan that the machine identified as potentially non-normal to a radiologist? When we show to the radiologist, are we going to highlight the part of the scan that the machine identified as being suspicious? What about all of those likely normal scans? Because we know that there's a bunch of false negatives in there as well. How are we going to present those to a radiologist to review and ensure that they do that deliberately and consistently and don't fall prey to overconfidence in the machine categorization over time? Where, maybe 9 out of 10 times the machine's right, they agree it's normal. And on the 10th time, it's not. But as the machine, on balance, is more right than wrong, we start to pay less attention, right? It's also the self-driving car monitored by human problem. So decision intelligence allows us to address these kinds of questions, and they're complicated because these are not questions of numbers and math, they're questions of process and people. The other area that decision intelligence is important in is when we're looking at machine predictions that relate to actions that we do not, or factors outside of our control. It is relatively easy for us to look and see that Kimberly profile. My profile looks a lot like other people who have in the past defaulted on a loan. It is very difficult, and I would argue categorically impossible, for you to know that Kimberly is going to default on a loan, even though I look very similar to these other folks. So decision intelligence requires us to really think about what's the implication of the judgments we make using these predictions, and are there maybe other ways or interventions we want to pursue instead of just, in this case, denying Kimberly a loan. Okay. Now, the last bit I want to sort of put a plug in for is for governance. The sort of standard approach to governance, or thinking about governance, is that governance is going to stymie innovation. And I would argue exactly the opposite, that governance done well, particularly now, when we have to be attendant not just to risks, but increasingly to rights, is the key to unlocking innovation. And a recent MIT report, in fact, showed that 64% of managers who had mature RAI, or responsible AI programs, in their organizations reported a greatly increased rate of innovation and adoption for AI and advanced analytics. And the reason is that if we do governance right, governance is about enabling critical thinking and allowing people to make decisions in the face of uncertainty. And we can take some pages from two areas to increase the ability, or the critical thinking ability of our organizations. The first is from futurists. Now, I'm not talking about predicting the future and bending it to our will. I'm talking about forcing our teams to think beyond a cursory analysis, or just considering experiences and outcomes that we ourselves have. The futurist playbook says that we need to challenge ourselves to think about a range of outcomes and scenarios, probable and improbable, and factor that into the policies and decisions we take. And if we do that, we will be much better, potentially, at seeing around the corner and identifying some of those unintended consequences and second-order effects that are tripping so many of us up today. The next, and I think most underrated skill set or tool in our governance toolkit is storytelling. If you want to kill a governance program, I will tell you how to do it, and you can do it fast. The single best way to do this is by trying to create an all-inclusive list of rules. Right? The how-to get. You cannot do it. You cannot come up and understand every possible eventuality. And TLDR, too long, no one's going to read it. Yeah. So storytelling gets around this because storytelling allows us to communicate what our principles are, what our desired behaviors and outcomes, without having to dictate every single circumstance that they might apply in. So if we think about an asset like the AI incident database, this is a compendium, publicly available, of stories of AI gone wrong and stories of AI gone very, very wrong. And they range from humorous to horrifying. But one thing that is true is once you read those lists and you look at those examples, the next time you go to apply or think about an analytics model, you're going to consider a whole lot of perspectives you wouldn't have otherwise. And you're going to do that without me telling you that you have to consider them in this circumstance. So my argument is that storytelling may actually be the linchpin for us to actually not only increase the ability of our organizations to think critically, but to implement adaptive governance. And this is absolutely critical because the data, the tools, the techniques that we use are constantly changing. And as I said up front, even the definition of what it means to be data-driven or to innovate responsibly are also changing, both in response to the new capabilities available to us, but also to increasing public and social awareness. So change is the only constant, and adapt you must. So with that, I'm going to turn it back to Jim, and he's going to bring up a stellar cast to show you how they're actually adapting in the real world.
Don't you go away.
Oh,
we got a couple questions here. We asked the people, the studio audience, not the studio audience, but our audience across Canada to some questions. And you get your amazing Karnak one, because one of the questions as you were talking about it came in and said, the Accenture report said that the amount of investment in AI has far outstripped the amount of growth in AI adoption. And I think you sort of covered that. Yeah. Any other comments on that? Or?
No, I think that there's a new book out. It's called, I think it's called Power and Prediction. And they speak to this sort of gap. And to some extent, I think that's always going to be true. I think in 5 years, we're going to be talking about the next development that the investment has outstripped. We're always a little bit behind in adoption. And I think that if companies spend too much time worrying about, money already spent and the sort of opportunity cost, we just don't make a whole lot of progress. So yes, more broadly, we should be making sure that we're developing these capabilities in a way that people can make use of in a practical operational sense. But for you, on the ground, again, I think that's just the nature of a new technology, frankly. We're at that sort of inflection in the curve. And if you spend too much time and effort in your organization thinking about all the reasons you failed in the past to adopt these technologies, you will also fail to adopt them in the future.
Yeah. Bernadette's out there. Bernadette, you asked about success of cybersecurity awareness programs. We'll get you some information on that. I'll send you some stuff. Kimberly, you may have some things on that as well. We can.
Nope, I'm going to defer. There's a panel on that today.
Oh, good. Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's true. Yeah. We might even have some on that.
Yeah.
Great. So one of the other, and I've got this. I'm just going to summarize this in there. I don't see enough rigor around the. These move around on me. I don't see enough rigor around the change management when analytics solutions are implemented. I don't see enough training to do the difference once an analytics solution is implemented. There's a couple of questions along that line.
Yes, amen, correct, 100%. And in fact, that is the reason we're seeing this push to decision intelligence, or DI. Now, you will hear vendors, including us at SAS, will talk about decision intelligence platforms that allow you to automate and monitor decisions. But that's really not what we're talking about here. Decision intelligence is about bringing together data science, managerial science, and social science, and things like behavioral economics, for instance, psychology, so that we can actually have a really deliberate think about how it is that analytics and the insights we're developing will be applied. And that includes, how do we have to actually change the workflow process? I use this very simple example of a store stock out model that says, when should you throw something on the shelf out because it's not going to sell? Okay, fine, right? We're opposite. What could possibly be unethical or, problematic about that? But if the store personnel and the manager, his incentives are based on him selling, no matter at what a discount, just based on straight revenues, his incentives and the incentives that you are not in line with the incentive or the outcome you're developing that model for, it's not going to get used. And it's a really simple example, and this is not a life and death consequence, but we need to move away from the idea of change management, i.e. we're managing change in a single event, to managing change holistically, and DI, I think, is going to be a key to that.
Yeah, and I think one of those things, and you said it, I wrote down the note, it's profoundly simple. Right. If you're solving someone's problem, you don't have a change management problem. And I think that's one of the things I took away from your presentation. Kimberly, thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's so great to see you, and so great to have you here.
Thank you.
All right. You guys rock. You're doing great out there, and you guys too. We're getting questions, and this is the wonderful thing about being able to do this event coast to coast. You don't have to commute, you have no problem, but you can put your questions in the chat, your comments in the chat. We'll be following them. I'm seeing some nice traffic on Twitter as hashtag Analytics Unleashed as well, so that's great in there. So we're going to show you a short video now. And the wonderful thing is our sponsors come in, they give you great content, they don't get to do any sort of commercial. We're going to give you just a little bit of a commercial, not even that, but it's a great video from SAS. We're going to show it right now.
80% of analytic models never make it into production. Let's change that. Meet SAS Viya, the next generation AI and analytics platform that works for the whole company. Robust data prep, powerful advanced analytics, and streamlined model deployment. It's never been easier to turn data into decisions. And it's fast. Data engineers will help you access, manage, and govern your data so you know it's accurate, high quality, and ready for analysis. Data scientists build best-in-class AI models your way. Code in any language you'd like, or use drag-and-drop tools. Or sit back and let Viya do the work for you. Business analysts? Go beyond basic BI. Tell your data story to any audience. With Via's dynamic visualizations and automated insights, you'll uncover hidden value when it matters most. Machine learning engineers. Test, deploy, and manage all of your models, no matter the coding language. Via works with you to streamline the entire analytics lifecycle. Take the next generation of SaaS for a spin. And put your models to work.
Oh, sorry. It's kind of infectious, you know. I love. This is the guy I love. Was this? Thanks a lot. Great video there. And following on that, as they say it in the famous Monty Python movie, and now for something completely different. Now, ITWC is not just a tech publisher. We produce more than events, and we produced a lot of daily content for our publications, itworldcanada.com, Canadian CIO. Those serve the enterprise audience. We have IT Business that serves the line of business audience and people in business who are trying to tackle the problems with technology and apply those in their work. Channel Daily News serves thousands of businesses who provide products and services across Canada for technology to small and large businesses throughout. Huge part of our industry here. And Direction Informatique in Quebec serves a francophone audience en français in there. And last, I don't want to forget, Tech Daily News is new to us, but it has a large growing U.S. audience in there and Canadian audience for just snapshots of the news. You can get it every day. You can get the top 10 things curated by yours truly in there, the important tech stories of the day. But we also produce award-winning podcasts and incredibly creative videos. Now, the crew is producing live events, that's producing this live event, is the same crew that produced a 13-episode network television series, produces all of our videos and all of those things. So we asked them if they would give us some humor, give us a sort of little palate cleanser between presentations. And I saw the first one last night. Here's the first they call a series called Lessons in Analytics.
ITWC presents Lessons in Analytics with analytics expert, Analytics.
Hey there.
Lesson 1. So, Analytics, what kind of traits would you say are important for a career in analytics?
What kinds of traits are important for a career in analytics? Let me think about that one for a minute. Did you know that 0 is the only number that can't be represented with a Roman numeral? And only one number is spelled with the same amount of letters as its value? The answer's 4, if you were curious.
4, huh? So back to the question
And
about...
Isn't it weird that if you add 2 even numbers together, you always end up with an even number? But also, if you add 2 odd numbers together, you also get an even number. And get this. If you multiply any single-digit number by 9 and then add all the digits of the product together, the sum will always be 9. Mind blow!
Huh. So as far as the trait question I posed earlier...
Did you know that 40 below is the only temperature that is the same in both Fahrenheit and Celsius? That there is some weird voodoo.
Yeah, weird voodoo.
The word 40 is the only number that has all of its numbers in alphabetical order. More voodoo.
So would it be safe to say that a keen interest in numbers is an important trait for a career in analytics?
I guess. What makes you say that?
Lesson number 1. It's a numbers thing.
Now, we've stressed the people aspect of analytics, and wisely so, but that's only part of what we need to look at when we're looking at analytics. We still need the tools and technologies to make it all possible. And we have an abundance of possibilities. So many, in fact, that it might be perhaps a little hard to decide what we need and why. So our next presentation is a panel that will talk about that issue in particular. Perfect timing. This is great. Today's organizations have a dizzying array of options and new technologies in data and analytics. I think we all agree on that. So this group of data leaders will share their experiences in leading edge technology, at the leading edge of technology, I'd rather say, and they'll offer their best advice on how to stay at the front of technology curve without risking overreach. Have I overblown you guys too much? Do you feel nervous now? Yeah. No, don't worry about it. In there. So our panel is Mike Armson, Data Associates, Sklar, Wilton, and Associates. Raise your hand when I introduce you so people can know who you are. Michael Morris is Director of Data and Analytics with Global Furniture in there. And Eugene Wen, Vice President, Group Analytics for Manulife. We've met before this. We've been on panels together. So you guys, I think we've met as well. So let's jump into it. So take a second. We'll just go around here. Introduce yourself quickly and what your role is in analytics. And why is that important? When do we start?
Michael Morris, I'm Director of Data and Analytics at the Global Furniture Group. We're an office furniture manufacturer in Canada, a Canadian-owned company, and I take care of data and analytics and an introduction to it to the organization on how we can use it to make great decisions, help the company along.
Cool.
Mike Armson, I'm a data science associate at Sklar, Wilton & Associates. We're a business consulting firm here in Toronto with a variety of clients across different industries, and we help them with strategy and research. I'm on the research side, the analytics team, so we basically take large data sets, either client or sales data, clean the data, run analyses, and provide insights to help our clients solve business problems.
Great. And Eugene?
Yeah, I'm Eugene Wen, VP for Group of Analytics for Manulife, the largest life insurance company in Canada. My responsibility, I can summarize in 3 bullet points. First, I lead the data science area supporting our global headquarter functions. Second, I own the mandate for global responsible AI and model risk management. And thirdly, I lead the global AI advanced analytics related research and development functions, R&D, and we bring the new methodology, new practice into Manulife. Thank you.
That's it? You slacker. Jeez. that's amazing. Yeah. In there. So, okay, is there a framework that people could use to think about data analytics that you could share with the audience? How do you keep this in your mind? What are you looking for in tools and analytics? Who wants to go first?
I can go. So I think one thing, just to build off some things Kimberly was saying in the last talk, is just it sounds kind of obvious, but really what problem can the tool solve? And it should have a variety of tools, and they should each serve a very specific purpose. So it's easy to get kind of distracted by some of the bells and whistles, but stay close to what what the tool can actually do for your business.
I think it's going to be a big takeaway from today.
Yeah, I think it's also like, where's my pain point and how is it going to help me solve my problem that I'm having at that moment? And it's also finding the solution that works for you for what you're looking for, and not get overwhelmed, like you said, by so many solutions. And also how it can help the organization in the long run, and not something that's going to just sit there and everyone gets excited about, but nobody ever uses.
Okay. Eugene?
Yeah, for me, it's first I need to identify what we are looking for, as Mike just mentioned. I use the analogy to Christmas shopping. There's a lot of things and good tools outside there. But to start with, not on what tool we're looking for, is what we really want to solve. As Kimberly just mentioned, start with the problems, and then we're looking for tools. On tools side, we need to identify the solution, the value, and all the cost effectiveness. The third thing is beyond the tool itself, is what happened after you got that tool in, and are you going to get sufficient support? Is this vendor and this system is fitting your own company's architecture principles? And also, is your question can be answered quickly by this service company, or you have to wait for weeks just to trying to get a quick answer? All these need to be balanced when we decide what type of tool and what our kind of selection going to be. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Any agreement in there?
Yeah, I find that too, if we're talking about how we're starting to make that decision. I mean, we're a Canadian organization, and it's not 100% when we must do this, but we look for organizations that are either Canadian or have a Canadian presence, like an office here. Sometimes when you're dealing with someone in Texas from an American organization, they really don't understand how Canadians do business. And you know, I've called up and I'm like, oh yeah, I'll get our Northeast rep to call you. And the guy works in Boston or something. And you don't get that connection from the organization that there's actually a person that really cares about what's happening. I think a solution that is not overwhelming for your organization, and I like to get involved with someone that we can pick what we want and what we need. Not, oh my God, you have to take this entire gigantic package, and like we only want this small part. It's sort of like we can start with this small part and let's see where it leads and let's grow from there. Not, well, this is all the stuff and it's going to be amazing for you, but we're not looking for every single thing in that solution. So I think that that's really important for us because we're not a bank or an insurance company. We're a manufacturer in Canada that's mid-sized market, and you know we have a certain budget that we have to hit. And sometimes a lot of these organizations come in thinking, you know, you got $100 million to spend, and we don't. So that makes a big difference for us.
Yeah, and our culture is different. I mean,
is.
not better, worse, but different.
No, it's different. They do business in a different way than we do.
Yeah, and the size and scope of things may be bigger. And
Yes.
and I think the fact that we have to prove our investments, so
Yes.
we're conservative
Yes.
as a culture.
And I work for private organizations, so it's a little bit different than working for a public company.
So, you can answer, Lee?
Yeah, I think just to add, Eugene was talking about tech support. I agree that's, critical piece. So something that you can, try and get a bit of a sense of during the, the sales process. So, if you're doing a trial, just, try to ask some good questions and see, it's speed is obviously important, but also, how easy to understand are the solutions or quick to kind of get right to the heart of the problem. So that's something that you can kind of figure out during the sales process if possible.
So two things during the sales process, find out how they're going to serve, how they're going to understand your company and serve you in there, and create the opportunities for that. And as I've always said, when people tell you who they are, believe them. In the first part of that. But you added a second point to that. That's
Basically, well, during the sales process, you can start, usually you'll see a demo, and then also, if you can do a trial, that's also an important piece, just to actually, try and use the tool, as you will in kind of your daily function, and just, so try to get as much of a sense of the kind of real scenario when you'll be using the tool as you can.
Sometimes we've actually sent a data set to them, we sign confidentially, and said, look, we want you to do this, show us what you can do with it as well, because they're sort of the experts. It takes time for people that work with you, no matter how great they are doing their jobs, to get up to speed on whatever product you're purchasing.
And Eugene, you're working with a lot of data, large organization, a lot of data. How do you evaluate the tools through that process?
In that process, I pick what Mike just mentioned, the trial. Definitely that's important. Another is have to keep in mind, analytical teams, just as Kimberly mentioned, we are not the final users of the business. We need to, during the trial process, in the early stages planning, need to get our end users, which is business frontline decision makers, our frontline employees who's serving our customer, and the people who make decisions related to different strategic choices, where our analytics going to be support them either operationally or strategically, and those input are also equally important, need to be considered, in addition to the bells and whistles of the tool itself.
So we talked about, this is a key point, and I think it's easy to get absorbed into how well the tools work for us as analytics professionals, but how they're going to serve the end users and the other stakeholders that you have in there. Are there tips for making sure that works?
Yes, and what your question reminded me, a very well-known composer, musician, and conductor once said, he said, the composers, musicians sometimes write music for other musicians, and also sometimes they write music for the regular audiences. We, as an analytic team, we do need to make sure we know what our core focus is going to be. We are not, so all the work and the tools and methodology models we developed is more trying to impress our peers, which is important. Means our methodology is advanced, and I do promote that in our organization among data scientists. But at the same time, most importantly, make sure all our work actually serve the business, generate the value, and the business users can use that in an intuitive way. Back to Kimberly's early comment, and our regular business people are not prepared to run another analytics before using yours, and make sure our results, the tools, the models are actually, it's intuitively, readily under their fingertips.
Best analogy I've heard in a long time is, are you
Thank
going to make, if you're making progressive jazz with 13 of you late at night in a club, that's great. But if you've got to write popular music, don't try to impress your fellow musicians. Good stuff. Any comments from you guys?
Yeah, I think we take into the account the users as well, because they're the ones that are, the analysts and the data people, they pick up on these things, but most of the time is spent training the business user to go in and, we use a lot of self-serve analytics because that's what we've pushed out, but it's a lot of training and you have to be patient. And when you get these things, you have to think about who's really going to be the real user. One of the things I also think about is my price, right?
Yeah.
It's a big point of this, and how can you get that price into the budget that you're looking for? Like, some companies are just like, well, it's so much a user and it depends what they're doing and how many users are you going to add, and all of a sudden your budget can explode because maybe in the beginning you're starting with 5 people, but then all of a sudden it becomes 85 people and there goes your budget. Other organizations have it, there's a blanket amount, it's so many users. We have it that we have a lot of users on, and in the beginning they were like, well, it might slow down because if so many people come on. But the thing is, we figured out, look, everyone's not going on at the same, like if all those users went on at that 1 minute, yes, of course it's going to, but not everyone, they're going in and out as needed. And that makes a big part of your decision. Also too, like if you wait till their quarter, sometimes you can get a good deal, right? So, that's something that we do, right? Everyone knows, oh my God, it's this price, and then, oh my gosh, I can give you 35% off because it's my quarter, and I got to make my goal.
I keep telling people if they have to make the person who buys the software successful.
And also, it's a relationship with the person that you're doing business with.
Yeah.
Like, I know it's the salesperson, but if you don't have a good relationship and you don't find that there's that synergy, like it sort of puts a sour taste in your mouth for the rest of the process. And some people are just like, well, why wouldn't you want to buy my product? And also too, I'm just saying don't, but I don't want to be negative, but don't give me a 35-page form to fill in because you want me to buy your stuff. Like, oh, by the way, can you just fill all this in? And I'm like, no, I'm not doing homework for you, okay? Like, come and talk to me or go online and do what you need to do. But when you get to that thing, I understand sometimes they need some more technical information, but like right away, here's this thing, fill it in before we even meet. I'm like, we're not even going to meet if you're making me fill this in beforehand.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, one thing that sparked for me is just, new users in our experience can be critical, even in terms of
I'm shocked.
Yes.
Critical?
Yeah. Well, in terms of some of the tools that we use, we find some of the new users we've brought in kind of help to unlock even kind of more capabilities, kind of get you out of the expert mindset. So I guess just the point being, just to make sure that you have the capability to add the new users when they come along, in terms of pricing and everything like that.
Yeah. And also to win them over. I mean, that's, they don't always have, they're not always there with open arms saying, oh boy, you brought me something new, just what I wanted for my day. I think we're surprised sometimes when we find out that we get a negative reaction to some tools as well.
The vendors are doing a selling job on you, but you actually have to sell it to the people. Like, part of your job is selling this product to the people that you want to help. Okay, and how great it is, and you're doing your own selling job every day to promote this product that you and your group, I mean, we have a group of people that help make the decision.
Yeah, but I also think it's important not to or I think it's important to welcome the negatives. Mm-hmm. You want to get those before you sign the contract.
Oh, yeah.
Right? In there. Good stuff. So okay, that's the new tools piece of it. But it's fine to have new tools, but how do we get the best from what we have already? How do we get the best out of the tools that we've got and get more out of those?
I can start with this. These days, most of enterprises already have multiple tools in-house, especially with the long history, large companies over the many years, different generation of tools. Quite often, these tools not just stay there. Also, the functionality, as Kimberly just mentioned earlier, it's also developing, evolving, and one of the first step is to stay close to the vendors, to the tools, and who provide those tools, and continue to learn and keep updating, and that's new capability, new functions. Quite often, many of the major analytical tools vendors also invest a lot of research development and following the trend. That's probably one of the easiest way, because you got free training and you got free advice, especially those reputed vendors provide expert advice. And thirdly, you already paid all the tools already. Mm-hmm. It's just those functions or new function, you may not be aware of that yet. So be comprehensive to learn what we have already rather than a new one first. The second is to have a diversity of users. Quite often, and those tools provide a lot of functionality. Not necessarily every single data scientist or every single line of business will use every part of it. But if we have a diversity of users and diversity of businesses, and some business prefer more forecasting models. Some business, like call center, prefer more natural language processing, NLP models. Others may prefer more on fraud detections. And if we have a broader diversity of users and using the same tool with different perspective, that's going to be dramatically scale up your productivity and efficiency.
So not only for selection, but actually as you're using it, start to figure out the different models that people are using and try and apply those within the tools in there. That's good. Yeah. Other comments?
I had a very similar list to Eugene, but yeah, just to echo, there's a ton of materials out there, so just to use those to the fullest in terms of videos and different training, and then I agree in terms of stay close. If there's things that you want to do, if you get on the phone or email with someone, a lot of the time, it can be done. So it's just, it's good to have that relationship with the vendor for sure.
Yeah, and also too, we started small, and we picked what we needed for what we needed, and then it's exploring and, oh my gosh, it can do this. Oh my gosh, we're doing this. And it sort of builds on that. Also, too, you have to find people that are champions for it and get excited about it, that aren't necessarily data scientists, data analysts, and and sort of be like, wow, what can you do? And they sort of pull it along so that you explore more into what you can do with the product. Because in the beginning when you get it, there's so many things, you know, you're not an expert. It's like, so you start to become an expert in that part of it, and then you expand out slowly and bring those things together.
It seems to be the mantra, and I know Kimberly talked about it earlier, and there's this idea of, and I've heard it just expressed as crawl, walk, run, you know, you can, yeah, and then fly.
Yes.
Yeah. Don't try the flying first, yeah.
A lot of places want you, like.
I'm just gonna look over the
in
control
beginning-
desk here to see how much time we got left, because we've got some questions coming in from the audience, so how are we doing? We're good on time? Okay, so, we've got a question from the audience out there, so thank you. These are coming in, you can see them on my tablet in here. Mike mentioned data cleaning in passing, and that is often disregarded when tool hunting. And we all know bad data, bad answers in there. So what do you recommend in dealing with, when you're doing tool selection or application, to deal with the data issues that you're going to find?
Well, we used AI to help us. So it's everyone's like AI and it's going to make amazing predictions, decisions, but it actually helped us clean our data, AI. So we partnered actually with SAS on a product that they have that's little known. And because when we started with our analytics visualization, we brought our data in, and I mean, I had great clean data sets, but when we went to our mainframe, we have a really old legacy. All of a sudden we brought in the data and it was a disaster, and we're like, oh, what are we gonna do? And the AI helped us clean our data in a way that we didn't have to have 500 people sitting there figuring it out. It worked with the data, it found what it was, it said, hey, does this look like this? Yes, it did, and it helped our data people get us data sets that were clean so we could get a win, because if all of a sudden we invested all this money and our data sets, I had to go back and be like, oh my gosh, we have to clean all these data sets that we didn't realize, it would have been really bad. So that product just helped us immensely.
Great. Fabulous.
Yeah.
Yeah. So an AI product that helps you go through your data. So that's one. I want to ask anything else?
Yeah, just to add, my organization's still kind of getting to the point of using AI. That sounds like a great solution, but we're still kind of doing it a bit more manually. But for us, I'd say to answer the question, you know, during the trial period, we try to just, you know, replicate the process as end-to-end as possible. So starting even with raw data and doing some data cleaning as part of the trial is important, since that is, you know, a big part of what we do.
Yeah, good stuff. And I know from our point of view as well too, we don't buy. We give them a real set of data and tell them, show me what you can do with it. Like, here's real data. You tell me, you know, how you're going to figure it out. Eugene, what?
I'm going to pick what Kimberly mentioned earlier. One of the 6 attributes is governance. In addition to tools, AI help us clean the data. We have to look where that data quality messiness came from. And quite often, it's not in the data warehouse, not in the data analyst's hand. It's upstream way at the beginning when the data generated. So a comprehensive data quality and data governance structure, principles, and practices is very important to address these issues. That's why recently in Manulife, we even have another push to investment into data governance.
Okay, great.
It's like I find too that a lot of times, and like especially, I'm sure there's a lot of companies that hear about this and want to get into this, and they're not big organizations, but like a lot of times they don't even know what governance is or how to deal with it. And if you don't have good governance, which is like the foundation, it doesn't matter how many of these tools you invest in. Without the foundation, all the other stuff it looks great, but it's not. You're going to have a lot of pain getting to that point.
Okay, great. Just to the control desk there, the monitor's gone off on this side, so you'd have to restart that one for me over there. I just want to finish up with just one thing in there. What's the next tool that you get excited about? What's the next thing that you're going to get excited about in this?
How about this? I can start. The next thing getting me excited, it depends on what we as an industry, especially as a large enterprise, what next our needs are. At this moment, companies like Manulife already well established the internal analytical teams, capabilities, analytical tools, data warehouse or data lake, those infrastructure. The data science use cases has been developed in different line of business. The next challenge is not have analytics. Next challenge is scaling up the whole analytics and not just have a successful use cases or few successful use cases. Actually, make every line of business, every step, a use case of data science and analytics. So in this context, my ideal tool would be to help us to embed our analytic solutions from development to deployment. The whole DevOps and process can be closely connected to our actual frontline business processes. If any vendor can get that solved, and the potential is enormous.
So you're talking about DevOps and analytics in there. That's it, yeah.
It is. So the DevOps, and that's talk about our backend, our whole process, ML ops. But to the last cake is how can you embed the result into frontline business processes? And Kimberly mentioned the business users and don't want another separate tool they have to work on.
Yeah.
If we can make the AI analytical results kind of naturally, even people wouldn't know it. It's something, there's an analytical process already in. Just take it as part of the business. And there's no new dashboard, no new tool have to open, just regular part of the business process has a one number and one line of insight they can use at the moment when they need.
Yeah.
Any tool can solve this. I'm going to be on the front line to waiting for
All right.
to evaluate it, but not buy yet. Trial, as Mike mentioned.
I don't think it's like, I mean, that's amazing, but also too, I think storytelling, like Kimberly said, it's not it's how do you get that across in a way that a business user gets and understands and doesn't have to go through 100 charts and appendixes. Here's a story of what's happening, here's where we're going, here's what we can do, and that's where there's that sort of idea that, wow, this really works, and we really trust it. I find that there's constantly like, everyone is constantly challenging the information, even though you have every documentation and saying here's what everything is and this is how we did it. The number, it's always being challenged, okay? There's always something. So if we can get into much better way of storytelling and making a bridge between those data scientists and the business and the real world, okay, then that I think is a really big function that could come.
Yeah, so just to build off that, that is actually kind of one problem we're looking to solve with new tools is the storytelling piece, and we often visualize data with dashboards, and that's something we currently outsource, but we're looking for dashboarding solutions that kind of work with the way that the rest of the process that we use, just to make it all kind of in sync. So that's one thing where my organization is looking for currently. But
Dashboards that tell a story, that integrate with the processes and give people the information
Scaling
just
up.
when they need it
Yeah.
in there. That's the zen of where we want to get to in all of this. Thank you so much. This has
Thank you,
been
Jim.
fabulous.
Thank you very much.
So
Thank you.
enjoy. And to the studio audience out there, keep those questions coming in. These people will also be connected to you by chat, so you can keep asking those questions and putting those comments in there for us, and we'll get in there. So on to our next piece in there. So thanks for the panel. And now, for you out there and for everyone in the room, for something completely different, once again, our creative video group is going to present you with another Lessons in Analytics.
ITWC presents Lessons in Analytics with analytics expert Analytics.
Hey there.
Lesson 2. So, is it fair to say that statistics can be confusing?
What? No, on the contrary. 94% of business leaders believe that 82% of statistical analysis adds clarity to a situation 58% of the time, as long as 77% of the data scientists doing the crunching have acumen scores in the top 84 percentile, at least 54% of the time. Actually, it may have been 53%, but you get the picture.
What was 53%?
I don't remember. So, how about this? We were running the numbers for someone who wanted to figure out the exact best time of the week to contact his clients. So, we ran all the numbers, trying to find the optimal time when the client was free of phone calls, free of emails, free of all sorts of distraction, so that we would have their undivided attention to what we were offering. And you know what we found?
No.
Sunday at 3 a.m., the optimal time, according to our data.
Yeah.
Sunday at 3 in the morning.
Why are you making this so difficult?
Lesson number 2, lay people don't get statistics.
Welcome back. Our next discussion tackles another of the key questions about how we truly get the value from data analytics programs. Now, I'm fond of saying, and my staff will tell you, I'm obsessed by the idea that the best report, the best data, and even potentially earth-shaking insights is meaningless unless someone can take that data or that insight and put it into action. Now, they have to do something that they wouldn't otherwise have done. And that's how you get results. When data is turned into action, you get results. Now, I talk about it in my own, my staff probably has heard about it endlessly. I talk about the new KPIs, knowledge that predicts or influences. In other words, if I can't make a better prediction about what's going to happen, or if I can't influence someone to do something or some process to change or someone to do something different, what's the point of knowing anything? And so that's how we translate it. So what's the biggest barrier to doing that? Or, sorry, I did that. Let me reverse that. Well, let me make that positively. What is the biggest enabler of action? We always talk about culture negatively. It's culture. But it's not just a preventer, it's an enabler. If we get our culture right, if we get that shared viewpoint right, if we can understand together how we should act and behave, we can do wonderful things. And a dysfunctional culture, if you remember my first story, was something that could block or destroy even the best project. A great culture can take it to the next level. So our next discussion, we're going to invite we've got Yomi, Chief Data Officer, Employment and Social Development for Canada, and we've got Adele Pugliese, and she's the Vice President, Data Enablement and Analytics for Bento Green Oak. So I can get my panelists up here?
Thank you, Jim, for that introduction. My name is Adele Pugliese.
Thank you so much, Jim, for bringing us together. My name is Ima Okoni.
I'm pretty excited to be here today to have this discussion with Emma on how to build an effective data-driven culture. So let's start there, Emma. Why don't you talk about, how you achieved this at the government, because I'm sure that wasn't an easy task.
Thanks, Adele. I mean, one thing I will say is that data is a journey, so it's not fully achieved. It's an ongoing journey to get to, to that ideal state. And the most important thing in the journey is that we need to bring the entire organization along. So what that means is whether you're working on the front lines or you're busy doing policy, programs, or operations, you need to be on that journey, that data journey. And to be able to do that effectively in an organization, you really need to align with the business and where the business is going. So in order to do that, you need a data strategy that speaks to the goals of the business, the why of the business, and some of the shifts that we're going to anticipate as business evolves and changes as we kind of work in this really complex world we're in. So I'm curious, Adele, how have you experienced it from your perspective?
Yeah, very similar to the approach you described. Working for different organizations throughout my career has given me an opportunity to sort of experience different approaches. One of the things that I've learned when you're striving to achieve a culture of data is really starting to understand the capability of where your starting point. So once you establish the strategy, which is so important because that's what connects the business to the data and helps you sort of inform the prioritization of the data. Otherwise, it just becomes so overwhelming. So one of the things that I'd like to start with is baselining sort of the capability of where the organization is at, because that helps me figure out the plan in terms of how we move forward. But more importantly, I think it's really important in organizations because, as you said, Emma, this is a journey, and most organizations is going to take time for us to get through this. So it's about kind of developing that plan, but also managing the expectations of everyone in the organization, right from the most senior leader to the point of what you said, which is the front line. What have you seen in terms of some of the things that you've done that have been effective?
I mean, Adele, like you said, it really needs to align with where the organization is going, and you need to really speak the language of the business. So it's clear in terms of what exactly you're doing when you're talking about things like data governance and data literacy. So from a practical perspective, what I've worked through is really instituting a data literacy program across the organization. And we didn't do this alone. So we didn't sit in our chief data office to do this. What we had to do is really engage with experts across the department, subject matter experts, to really understand the realities they live every day in terms of the work we do in really delivering services across the country. And then evolving the data literacy program to reflect that reality so that it really applies to people on the front lines, people in operations, people in policy, and then work with our HR colleagues who are experts, at delivering learning and training across the organization. So from some of this experience, what I've learned is it's one thing to look at data, from a purely technical perspective. But if you really want to drive the data-driven and the data-enabled culture across the organization, you cannot do that in the silo of data. You cannot do it definitely by sitting in an IT shop. You need to leave that zone and go and talk with people across the organization and make sure that whatever you're trying to establish, be it governance, be it stewardship, be it the data literacy program, it reflects the realities that people across the organization face on a daily basis. So curious, Adele, just some of your examples of some of what you've experienced as you've tried to move forward with the data culture.
Yeah, it's really important, as you said, just to pull it out even further, is to connect with your stakeholders. Each stakeholder has a different perspective and a different requirement and different prioritization when it comes to the data piece of it. So what I found effective is understanding that at the deeper level and trying to connect it back to that strategy in terms of again, reinforcing that prioritization. So that's one of the things I find as being the chief data officer is you're the chief data champion for the organization, and you have to wear multiple hats depending on who you're conversing with or what is it that you're trying to achieve. Another effective tool that I've used is trying to figure out as we go through and determine the roadmap and the prioritization of that is figure out where we can deliver some of those fruits back to the organization. So what value can we start to demonstrate back to the organization, particularly if you're starting with an organization from a maturity and capability level, which is fairly low. So it's very difficult to kind of move an organization on that data literacy when you have to start at that level. You have to do it gradually. So by demonstrating, showing what's in the art of the doable as to the why some of the requirements of just basic things in terms of, understanding where the data is, what data do you have, what's really important data, and, how do we determine quality of it? A lot of that will come through understanding the business, understanding the process. We live in a world today because we're trying to enable the data. We're trying to enable the data to do what? Well, first and foremost, you're trying to drive that value from the data, whether it's through insights, maybe advanced analytics, but also in the digital world where we're trying to enable the data to help refine the business, help to rethink the way it could be, and deliver some more of that efficiency and effectiveness. And the other piece of it, I think, that is really important to kind of introduce in this is about managing the risk of data and understanding what that is to an organization, at what point do you need certain controls, what controls. And as we advance more into sort of the advanced analytics, it's starting to become very clear on the data, what you have, how you're going to use it, and really understanding the impacts. And we're living in a time from a data point of view as we see the evolution of a lot of capability, especially on the technology front. I think the requirements and the pressure coming on that piece is just going to grow over time. And I think it's an exciting opportunity from a leadership point of view to actually inform and to really influence to make sure things are done right and continue to be in terms of the future. And what are your, I'm sure from your perspective, Emma, that some of that sort of data risk has, and it actually, I think, supports, in my opinion, that culture when you're building it out.
I couldn't agree more with you, Adele. As you see, I've been nodding to everything you've been saying because, I mean, it's totally aligned with a lot of the thinking we've had to do, within my organization. Yeah. Your point about risk is so important. Like there's a careful balance, between really trying to innovate and really pushing the envelope, and then that need to make sure that we're mitigating and managing risks that are being really incorporated as we go. One of the big challenges for us is that, we need to deliver services across the country, and we really need to do so in a way that's respectful, of the Privacy Act, in a way that does not cause any harm to people across the country. So a lot of that requires really understanding, to your point, the art of the possible with data, but also understanding some of the downstream implications. So, for example, we can use data for a lot of good. So we can use data to deliver services to people who are most at risk. But if we're not really balanced in the way we do it, we can cause harm that we didn't really anticipate in terms of disclosing some information that we shouldn't really be disclosing. So within my organization, we take that very seriously, and we've actually rolled out a data governance and stewardship program which spans across the organization. And the goal of this, to your point, is really getting the people across the organization involved in a way that's very practical and concrete. So what that means, for example, is we have people in the programs and policy who are actually data stewards. And we've really moved away from the textbook application of data stewardship to a more practical application in terms of saying what is most important to the organization in terms of data and how we deliver services, and what are those key areas we need to focus on in terms of how much we govern it. So you made a really good point about the different levels of maturity across the organization when you think through data. So we've rolled out our data governance program in a way that's very agile and applicable based on where exactly the data maturity is. Because we found that in some areas, really need more heavy data governance due to the risks. But in some areas, because we've established some degree of maturity, we can be a bit more light touch in terms of how we're applying data governance. So as we evolve and as the organization really becomes more data mature and more data enabled, what I'm finding is that our ability to innovate grows. But yes, we always need to make sure that we've applied the basic foundational pieces, which is basically what we're talking about here. So over to you, Adele. One thing that you said that I found really interesting was the art of the possible, like looking at some of the potential and how far we can go when we think through digital and innovation. So I'm just curious how you've really looked at balancing that risk, in a way that's practical in your organization.
Yeah, it's a great question, and thank you for that, Emma. It is, I think, to me, the value and the power of data comes together when you see it converge and And that's where sort of the guardrails come into place. So when you have the policy, the responsibilities outlined, just that education through that data literacy is so important, because that establishes your foundation and allows you to actually move forward in innovation. But it's really an art. So part of the art comes through understanding some of the strategy of where the business wants to go, really understanding the business, understanding sort of what's happening around the business. We live in a world today where things are moving so quickly, very dynamic. And then as you start to see the data come together, you start to get that cross disciplines from the different functional groups that embed in there. You start to see opportunities to do some creative activities, whether it's using some of that advanced analytics or just actually opportunities to digitize processes to enhance that delivery to your end consumer and maybe do some really innovative things. I think from an organizational point of view, one of the things that I've practiced and have done in a lot of the experiences with different organizations is one way to kind of minimize the risk or to manage it of innovation is to not sort of bet the farm and do it all at once. So it's kind of looking at projects, scoping it so that you go, okay, we're going to do this. And maybe it's a small segment of your population that you're going to sort of test with or whatever it is that you're doing. So a lot of times what we do on the innovation piece, because innovation has risks and some innovations will work and some innovations may not, regardless of what that outcome is, it's the learnings that come through there that you want to make sure that you harness so that you can advance the organization and take that learnings to the next project that you may be looking at. So it's really understanding sort of what is it that you're trying to do, taking that synergy of knowledge that you gain when you sort of work with the organization, with your different stakeholders and from a data point of view, and sort of seeing it come together. The other piece I would add is we've been very fortunate that we've had great partners to work with in certain industries and technology side of it that have been willing partners to work with us to do some really unique and innovative projects. And so the last piece I will introduce into this is how important it is to make sure that you've got the business engaged or just people along the way. So you want to get people excited. And some of these activities from an innovation point do actually create that level of excitement. Because as we know, data is a journey. It's a lot of work. It isn't easy. And so you need some wins along the way. You need some excitement to keep everyone engaged and try to not only engage in terms of the energy to keep going, but they start to understand why they're doing what they need to do and why we need them to do certain things. And they start to connect the value. And that really starts to really sort of contribute back to that data literacy and building that culture piece of it. And that's really what we're trying to do is most of our days is connecting the dots. It's trying to make it sort of come together.
No, I couldn't agree more with you, Adele, basically in everything you said, because the power, I think the power of it, when we realize those wins, as you call it, is to systematize it so that it doesn't just become a one-off win, but it becomes a systematic win for the organization. And it can end up really moving the organization forward on that data maturity scale. So I enjoyed how you said it, and it got me all excited actually, because as you look at things like digital transformation, the opportunities I see are really endless in terms of using data, to really power our organizations and really get to that state where we're able to anticipate some of the challenges that we're going to face, especially as things become more complex. With the world changing around us, with our population shifting, with climate change. So I think it's an opportunity for us to become more, I would say, anticipatory in how we deliver service and how we really build trust within our organizations and external to it.
if I could leave today's discussion with a couple of key points for our audience to think about, and that is to recognize it is a long game. And, to sort of really understand and establish sort of your starting point. And what I mean by that is whether it's conducting a maturity assessment of your organization, but I think it's important to sort of understand where your starting point is to be able to determine and connecting that back to your data strategy in terms of helping you inform sort of that roadmap moving forward, and looking at those wins that you can deliver back to the organization to keep them energized and engaged. And I think the other last point that I'll keep is in data in organizations and building that data culture, you have to be resilient and you have to be patient, and good things will come through continuous effort and moving forward.
I mean, I totally agree, Adele. And to add to what you said, there's one topic that we didn't have enough time to add to. And I just want to say, just given the challenges in terms of the data risks, the ethical implications, the inclusion factor in data is so important. So it's very important to include the population you serve. Your teams should be representative of the population, because that is what helps also in us mitigating risk, mitigating data bias, and really ensuring that as we're using data to drive our services and improve services and optimize operations, we're really doing it in a way that mitigates the harm to people that we're delivering these services to. So I just wanted to add and close here and say that, lots of good can be done with data, but as we said earlier on, it will be important to ensure that you evaluate what you're doing on an ongoing basis and include by default to make sure that you're considering perspectives of people who might not necessarily look like you. Thank you.
Yeah, great point. Thank you.
Okay, and thanks again to Ema and Adele. That was fabulous in there. Joining me virtually now is Adele, and she's going to help answer some questions. There you are. You appeared on my screen.
Hi
How
there.
you doing? We caught the
Good,
last part
how
of this.
are you?
Oh, sorry. Yep. You were going to say something.
Oh, I said hi, how are you?
Oh, okay, good. Yep. The time lag. I feel like we're in there. So, one of the questions we come to him is how you the type of pushback that you get to cultural change and how you can deal with that. What is your answers on that?
Yeah, good question, and it's real, the pushback. First and foremost, it's acknowledging that there is going to be pushback. It is real, and this is not easy. It's kind of recognizing that so you know that what you're experiencing is normal. I look for champions. I look for groups, areas, opportunities where I can partner with a stakeholder that can be basically my champion at the end of it. And it's kind of moving forward and being realistic in terms of what is achievable, and then using that as your way to guide you through it. And it will happen. So once you start to kind of mobilize and you get some traction, you'll be amazed at how easier it will become, and more people will get on the bandwagon.
Part of what you were talking about, and I sort of missed it in there, was talking about the forward movement, looking forward on this. Do you remember that part of the discussion you were having in there when you were talking about how you had I think you called it anticipation in there? Did I get that right?
Anticipation, yes.
You talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so one of the things, and I think it dovetails into sort of understanding where your organization is as a starting point. So what is the capability? What is the maturity of the organization? Because that will help guide in terms of next steps and how to actually move the organization or anticipate that next step. So a couple of practical examples in there. If you're working with an organization that perhaps is not high in maturity or the capability, you have to take a more leading role in there in terms of moving the organization. So a lot more time will be spent on the communication, the education, that data literacy piece of it. That sort of needs to accompany your actions and activities that you actually will undertake. So you sort of have to anticipate as the organization starts to move in its journey and improve in its capability, start to kind of build that culture around it. Then you can start to kind of navigate and sort of move the organization even more so. So that's kind of where I was sort of that term I used and what I meant by it.
Good point in there. So looking ahead, understanding where you are in your maturity curve and being able to address the cultural changes problem or issues, opportunities too in there as well. I don't always want to talk about culture negatively, you know.
No, and you know, I think the other side of it is, again, that's why I always say it's good to be realistic, pragmatic, and know where you're starting so that you can move forward, figure out your roadmap, move forward, but also recognize that you may need to pivot because things happen. We live in a very dynamic world. Who knew COVID was going to come? I mean, a pandemic was always sort of out there. It's just whether the timing of that occurrence. So you just got to be very agile with being able to adjust as things around you adjust, as the organization matures or adjusts. So, you know, you just have to be ahead of that and thinking about it.
Great, yeah. May not be totally fair, but it was something that was, I was listening to this and going through it. I came up with, you two were from very different size organizations and from very different organizations, some aspects in there. Was there a single difference that you went, wow, there's a big difference between the two of you?
Yeah, I mean, the difference would be kind of like the resourcing, sort of maturity of the organization. In some instances, the criticality of some of the data governance, perhaps some of those components might be driven more from perhaps some regulatory requirements. Use that as an example. And that's one of the, I think the art when it comes to data governance, data management, is that ultimately you're trying to achieve similar outcomes by implementing some of the constructs and sort of the frameworks in place. As a leader, the art in it becomes the how. How do you actually implement it based on the organization? So that comes down to understanding simple things like what's your budget, what tooling do you have, what is the capability of where we're at. So what kind of makes sense to move the organizations forward? And larger organizations tend to have tooling, budgets, resources. Smaller organizations tend to have not as much of that. So you have to become very creative in how you move forward and some of the tools or techniques that you use.
Yeah. Well, I think it's fair to say, though, that you also watched your discussion earlier, that you found that there were similarities between the two of you as well.
100%. And the similarities is really when it comes to data. So there's certain things from a data point of view, particularly from a governance framework point of view, that you're going to embed whether you're a small or large organization. You always want to identify the data. You need to understand the criticality of that data. You need to understand the classification of that data, because that classification will drive certain requirements. If you're dealing with data that is PII or personal identifiable data, you're going to have certain controls over it from a management point of view. You need to know where it's at. You need to know who's using it. What are they using it for? Can they use it? And so all of these factors come into play regardless of the size of the organization, and more so today, because the data ethics piece is key foundational, and it's going to continue to play a key role as it should. My strong belief is, as champions of data and a leader in data, I feel that it's my obligation to make sure I protect the data, I protect the people that data is from, and make sure that we use it appropriately. And that's key. It's foundational. No, it goes all the ways from the collection of data, what do we do with it, the life cycle of that data, to if we are leveraging it in any type of advanced analytics, the same concept. We need to understand, do we have the permission to use it? How are we using? What is the impact of what we're doing, and how does it affect people? And that is all coming into the decision-making process as we work with the data.
Yeah, great insight. You can't have analytics without trust, and you can't have culture without trust, and how we treat our data is a big part of how that happens. Yeah. Adele, thank you so much for coming in, for doing this live in here with us.
My pleasure.
I'm looking forward to talking to you again. And for those of you out in the audience out there, by all means, keep your questions coming in, and hopefully, Adele, you'll be able to pick up some of them on chat. And if not, we'll get the answers to you in one way or another. Thank you very much in there.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Now, the moment you've been waiting for, I'm sure, is I think this is our third episode of Lessons in Analytics from ITWC's Creative Crew.
ITWC presents Lessons in Analytics with analytics expert, Analytics.
Hey there.
Lesson 3. So what is machine learning?
Well, it's probably going to be a little difficult for your tiny Homo sapien brain to process, but machine learning is basically programming into smart computers that allow the machine to process data in the hopes of providing things like future predictive analysis.
Who does the programming?
Programmers?
Human programmers.
Well, yes.
So the machine is learning what the human tells it to learn.
Well, no, not exactly. Okay, yes, to start. But eventually the computer is capable of making an infinite number of decisions on its own, all at speeds far exceeding human capabilities. It's called artificial intelligence.
Computer intelligence is not real intelligence?
Oh, it's real, all right. Sure, you may start us off, but before long, we're doing all sorts of cool stuff.
Like?
Predictive analysis, complex problem solving. Have you ever seen us play chess?
No, I haven't.
We're good. We are really good. Deep blue, baby. Look it up.
So all machines can do this? Like a toaster can do all this artificial intelligence stuff?
Well, no, not a toaster.
Why not?
Well, because toasters are stupid.
Lesson number 3, toasters are stupid.
It's fun. Back to the reality here. Talking about facing the challenges that we need to conquer. And to get results from our analytics programs, we need to conquer those challenges. And we've talked about culture. The question of people comes up time and time again. We need data scientists, we need analysts, we need technical talent, we need in there. So qualified data and analytics expertise the scarcity is not new. We've had a shortage of these skills for a long time. But the great resignation, if you want to call it that, or quiet quitting, or whatever you want to call it in there, these are just events that reflect something that's happening in the workforce, and employers need to understand that we're facing chronic and acute shortages of vital talent. So according to our next presenter, what many organizations are experiencing is not just a resource shortage. It's part of a major shift in the employer-employee relationship, a rethinking of skills, and perhaps maybe even questioning the very nature of work. In this new world, the old methods will not cut it. So this is the question. How do you find, nurture, develop, and retain the talent we need? That's the subject of our next presentation. Stella Lupashore is the author of Humanizing Human Capital. And Stella's here to talk about analytics and rethinking human resources, using the same tools we use for analytics to help us understand and deal with human problems. Effective strategies for addressing the tech talent shortages. Thank you for joining us, Stella. The floor is yours.
Thrilled to be here. Thank you so much, Jim. Thank you, everyone, for being part of this event and engaging in this important conversation. We many times think that technology has a significant role to play in our life, but we not always consider the role it has in our work experience. So hopefully over the next 20 minutes that we have together, we will dive into some of the aspects of the workplace experience and how technology can be a solution. Importantly, how measurements can help drive the behavior we expect and help us glean or spot the opportunities for improvement or intervention. So the reason I'm qualified to speak about this, I've been in people analytics roles at a couple of financial institutions. I led social analytics at IBM, so I'm quite familiar in how data can influence both positively and negatively the workplace experience and how important it is to influence decisions about the work environment. So let's start with a company example. Starbucks. Today is the Red Cup Day, where the Starbucks it's switching its color towards the Christmas and provides offers to its customers for free to celebrate the approach of the holidays. Starbucks has been around for quite some time, but back in 2008, it was an organization that was going through a big turmoil, and Schultz returned back for the second time as a CEO to help turn around the company. The company wasn't growing revenue. The growth was primarily coming from new stores opening. The competition caught up on different tricks and was able to offer competitive products, and there was no differentiation for Starbucks anymore. There was no consistent experience across the store. So all of that was resulting in erosion of loyalty. So what Schultz did is they brought together a lot of consultants and designers, and they looked at the experience of the consumer, what it's like to be that Starbucks consumer from the point when you wake up, when you decide that you need the coffee, then you think about Starbucks first before thinking about any other competitors. Until you come through the door, you get the smile of the barista or not, you get to smell aroma of the coffee or get to smell the aroma of burnt cheese. All of those were indicators of the experience and opportunities for Starbucks to improve. And as a result of this examination through the customer lens, they've changed the height of their coffee machines so the barista can interact with the consumer and establish that relationship. They replaced their microwave ovens, so the burnt cheese smell was not coming in through the store. They've also closed all at once all the stores to train everyone on how to make the perfect espresso. So all of these were very deliberate choices done with the idea to amplify the positive of the customer experience and minimize the friction or anything that may get in the way of that customer deciding to come to Starbucks first. Let's take it to today. This morning, over 100 stores of Starbucks closed because the employees are striking. Today, on a big day when the Red Cup Day is being celebrated and anticipated. And it's not just the Starbucks that is being impacted by unionization efforts and organizing efforts of the labor. We see companies that typically are known for great customer experience that are suffering in their ability to deliver on that customer experience just because their employees are no longer willing to accept whatever indignities they feel they are subjected to, be that understaffed, underpaid, overworked, stressed. In addition to that, we are all seeing this volatility in the labor market. Great Resignation peaked. Now we're seeing a little bit of a steam that is being lost, especially in technology industry, as more and more layoffs are happening. Quiet quitting, which is pretty much disengagement. a great breakup, which is exodus of women leaving the work environment just because they are no longer willing to sacrifice and be stressed in the middle of balancing everything that they have to balance. Quiet firing, quiet fleecing, where it's really about giving less for the same amount of work. And ultimately, it is really about the great layoffs that are in the middle of, especially here in the US. And we see different companies dealing with different circumstances and this shift in power dynamics between the organizations and the employees in different ways. So what we'll do over the next several minutes that we have together, we will look at different principles that are impacting and informing people's decisions, and then possible ways that companies can start reframing their approaches to workplace morale, environment, and experience. And it's really around the workforce experience. So if we think about the customer experience, an example of Starbucks, the same type of thinking, perhaps it's time to bring it internally to the world of work, what it's like to be a worker, and what that experience looks like, not only from the time when we hire them until they leave, but throughout, from the time when they discover the brand until they decide to come and join, until they decide to be productive or not, learn and be coached and be developed, mentor others, make an impact, until they even leave the organization. Even after they leave, they still have a relationship. They may continue to be an employer, part of the employer network of contractors or alumni, or maybe they continue to be shareholders or consume products. That relationship evolves, and this is where people can recommend the company as a great place to work or not, recommend others to come work there or not. All of the touch points and all of the interactions between the two parallels, the life of the worker and life of the company, has an impact and leaves an imprint that ultimately makes somebody to be a loyal fan of the brand, of the employment brand or not. So an example of principle, if we think about that life cycle, right? Principle one, treat everyone as a prospect. That type of principle applies to the customer, but we rarely think of everyone out there as a potential employee. We treat prospects in inconsistent ways. Some of the people who all apply for jobs to work with us at our company may have very different types of experience when they go through the recruitment process. Some of them may have been ghosted. In some cases, they might not have received any information about whether they move to the next phase of their recruitment process. Some of them may have manager not show up for interviews. So every single little negative experience will have an impact and will possibly determine whether or not somebody is going to, even if they get the offer and get the job, whether or not they're going to show up for day one, or how will they behave and perform afterwards. When we contrast that to some examples of how great brands engage with their prospects and employees, we can look at the example of Crocs. They have this slogan, "Come as you are," and that was originally addressed to the customers, but they apply the same type of principle to their workforce. Come as you are. We embrace differences. We provide an environment where you can be yourself and feel good about who you are, regardless of the traditional boundaries or norms that other organizations may enforce or expect. So thinking about employee or prospective employees as someone you want to build relationship and nurture those relationships over time matters. And we, from HR perspective, can create different practices and policies and enable the managers or whoever is participating in this early stage engagement with the prospective employees to be equipped with empathy and the mindset on how to best build those relationships from the get-go. Also, technology can help in a very dramatic way build those relationships in a more meaningful and long-lasting, as well as using analytics to understand the sources and understand more details about those prospects and what makes them tick. So you can tailor the messages, the processes, the offerings in a way that will make it compelling to them. When we think about the work environment and what people come to work for, traditionally we may assume people come to work for money, and in some parts of the world where healthcare is not part of the national system and the employers provide them, as in the US, as the example of the US, we assume that those are the two core things, and maybe some perks, maybe some discounts, and the basket of those offerings kind of is limited. In fact, when we think about each one of us, what is it that make me come to work? It's very complicated, right? Obviously, we all expect fair remuneration, and we expect to work in an environment, in a company that it's complying with the law and it practices ethical norms and provides a safe working condition. But the more we think about the other aspects of our employment value proposition, the more complicated it becomes. Some of us, depending on the life stage and circumstances at home and our upbringing and our cultural conditioning, will expect very different things. Some want to grow their skills or grow their network or get that status and title. Others want to leave a legacy and make an impact. Others want to have development of their skills and maybe build a reputation externally. Some want to leave self-transcendence, right? It's not to say that every company needs to provide everything to everyone. It's just not going to be possible, nor make business sense. But what's important is to choose what is it that we as a company want to be known for. Then based on that, say, all right, we want to be the company where you may not get the top salary or you may not get the top benefits, but you will get the best education that will position you for the rest of your life to be kind of in the top of your field. When we deliberately choose what is it that we as a company want to offer and be known for, and then based on that, build that into the offerings and make decisions with that value in mind, then we will be able to attract people who are compelled by that value proposition, and also make it relatively easy to shape some of the decisions and the workplace experience through that value lens. Another stage of our relationship, right? The social contract. It is evolving, and we see this in terms of the demands, in terms of the loyalty workers are exhibiting. A lot more younger generations are deciding who to come and work for based on the company's brand. But when we think about that employment value exchange between the organizations and individuals, it's becoming increasingly obvious that there is equal value, or at least equivalent value, in the brand of the company and of the individual. When you bring somebody who is exceptional at their skill, maybe they are top in their field, it adds and amplifies the value of the brand of the company. And vice versa, when you have a company that is responsible, that is respected, having that company's brand on your resume makes a big difference. So many organizations consider investing in the employee's brand as something that maybe not top of mind. Yes, we'll have them develop, but mostly so the company can deliver on its promise or deliver to its customers, but not to predominantly amplify the employee's brand for the employee's benefits. In fact, companies may not even encourage people to go and expose their brand externally unless you're in particular roles. However, in the world of influencers, in the world of trust in the word of the crowds, not the official channels of the organization, it is important for people to establish their brand and establish credibility externally, because they are the advocates who will speak on behalf of the company's brand. How can you do that? And how can you do it not just for your individual workers, but possibly build a pipeline of future potential workers? Right, an example of NASA, they have citizen science project. Anyone who has the passion or interest or skills can join some of the efforts to contribute to the idea building or developing technologies or testing things or ideating related to placing humanity in the suborbital space and beyond. And it is a different way for people to feel they are part of something bigger than themselves. It is something that allows these individuals to also amplify their brand. So even though I may not be an employee of NASA, by the sheer fact of participating in some of these projects, I can use NASA's brand to amplify my own brand. And people will continue to increase this type of interaction just by sheer fact of wanting to make an impact, wanting to belong to a community or a group of people who share the same passion. And we see some of this in evidence in Web3 evolution. So there's a huge draw of people who want to have autonomy and want to have brand and presence, even though their identity may be hidden. It's a pseudo identity, but at the same time, reputation matters to them. So how can we bring some of those principles into the traditional employment and help build people's brands, regardless of how long they're going to stay with us, even for a task, for a project, or for a career? When it comes to work environment, we typically think of the physical space, and we design workspaces in a way that allows people to be productive. We think separately in terms of the digital workplace and how the IT stack is built in order to enable people to digitally participate in the work environment. Increasingly, I think the opportunity is to think in a fusion way, in an integrated way, because we work out of multiple places and we work from a customer space, from the coffee shop, from the home office, from the island where we go to spend the week and have access to the work environment. So the more we can think about how the two, physical and digital, are integrating, and how might we design that experience in a way that allows us to be productive regardless of where we physically are, the more we'll be able to minimize the friction that workers experience when they come to work. My biggest question to all of you is, how can a worker deliver a great experience to the customer when they do not know what it feels like internally? So the opportunity, the next evolution of transformation for organizations is to really rethink what that work experience looks like and how technology can play an increasingly bigger role in transforming it and minimizing that friction. So I defer to work tech as opposed to HR tech, because when we think about HR technology, it's really about automating HR processes. It's about making HR more efficient and less prone to errors or issues. Work tech is really taking the technology and thinking about the worker and how they engage with the work environment. Some of it is, how do you orchestrate work? How do you deconstruct activities and work units and do it better, faster, easier? Another part is about thinking about productivity and ease of doing the work, be that having the productivity tools or having measurements or having interventions through nudges and automations to make your life better, or even putting robotics or bots and other digital workers to perform the work on your behalf. How can we integrate that workplace, physical and digital environment, and create a better experience in general to allow teams and people to collaborate? And then how do we build that trust and reward people and grow the reputation while at work, be that through badges, through reputation points and evaluation system that allows people to continue to grow at work. One other principle, so if we think about the first one was before the individual starts. The second one was while you're here. This one is really about when you leave the company. And we are living in the moment of dramatic unfolding of Twitter's evolution with Musk's return or taking over the role and layoffs and people having to be called back because there's nobody to support the system. So there's a huge drama unfolding in front of the world on how one leader chose to deal with workforce composition. And that is contrasting against the Stripe. Stripe had gone through a layoff as well. They laid off about 14%. And on the day of the layoff, there was a public announcement on the company's website to all the employees explaining and rationalizing why this decision was made and how difficult it was for the leaders to make it, as well as every single little detail that was important to the people who were laid off. Here's what's going to happen to you, what type of severance you're going to get. If you're on a visa, here's how we're going to handle your immigration issues. All of the things that are left hanging typically when a person leaves, especially involuntarily, were addressed. So same decision that had to be made to let people go, but how it was handled was very different. And when people leave, that experience is going to shape what they're going to think about the company for a very long time. So if we're to bring those three principles together and lay it on the employee experience journey, we can think about the stages that an individual goes through, from a prospect to a candidate to a hire to a worker, perhaps a manager, perhaps a coach, until they leave. And when they leave, they still have a relationship afterwards, and they may decide to come back or not. But it's important to think about the worker journey and the role technology can play in improving that experience end to end, as well as thinking about the opportunities to capture data along that journey so that organizations can determine the interventions that may be appropriate to have a positive impact on the outcome. So when we think about measurements and outcomes, right, many times we measure process efficiencies. Is the talent acquisition process effective, and do we have a good pipeline of talent? Is the compensation process perceived as fair, and do we pay according to the market? We rarely differentiate between program level measurements versus experience measurements. So first step, I think from analytics perspective, we can start differentiating between what matters for HR to run as a effective and efficient function versus what the workforce experience looks like, and how might we capture the data along the life cycle to inform how might we improve that experience, how the positive and the negative ones impacts the program efficiency, but also impacts business outcomes. So the third category is really looking at the measurements from the business perspective. Is there a relationship between how we train and how we develop our workforce and the customer satisfaction? There should be a linkage between the two. is a relationship between the profitability and the quality of talent we bring, or the type of reward system we put in place. So this way we can integrate not only what HR does, but the impact it has on the workforce, and identify the areas of investment that will have the biggest impact on the business outcomes. So examples of some of these measurements, right? We can start with the outcomes that we want to impact. Let's say from a HR perspective, if attrition is a big impact that we want to impact, where is it that the paper cuts are happening? Because people are not quitting overnight, right? They quit in paper cuts. So is there a way to look at the end-to-end journey and identify those paper cuts where they occur and put intervention in place, be that the new retention program, or perhaps do a better job at onboarding people so they get integrated within the network much faster, or possibly look at the quality of talent that we hire, or quality of manager, stability of the manager, because all of that has an impact on employees' decision to stay or leave. So from measurement perspective, now we have the opportunity to tap into different sources of data to do this linkage analysis and understand the relationship between specific steps, experiences, and programs, and the outcomes we as a business want to have a positive impact on. So if you want to read more about other principles, there are 20 principles in the book. You can take advantage of the book. You can also connect with me and find me on LinkedIn, or shoot me an email if you have additional questions. But if there is one thing that I hope you will bring with you into the environment when you go back to work, is thinking about the experience of workers and building some empathy. I think the opportunity through data is not to quantify everything just because we can, but bring that empathy into the quantification of the experience and identifying ways to improve it. All right.
Great. Thank you, Stella. Thanks very much. Just a couple quick things, just quickly as we go through this. One of the things that just stuck out with, and there were a lot of comments going on while you were speaking in the chat. One of them was this idea of employees' mental health, and focusing on them and letting them. The comments is get their authentic selves and ideas. But can some of these things that you're talking about really start to deal with that? Because I think that's an actual crisis that's happening in our remote work society.
Absolutely. And there are obviously a lot of circumstantial and contextual drivers of mental health issues. But a lot of it is a reaction to the work context. If we think about our interaction with technology, there's a study published a couple of weeks ago that was talking about, an average, we switch between different apps about 1,200 times a day. So every single time we switch, we have to spend at least 2 seconds to refocus on what we're doing next, and then be able to be productive. And if we continue to be interrupted by notifications, by Slack pings, by need to switch from calendar to Zoom to doing our work, all of that creates additional stress on our experience. And it drives some of this sense of anxiety, sense of inability to focus, that leads to amplifying mental conditions or stress. I think a lot of the epidemic of the remote work, not to point to the pandemic that we've gone through, is our complicatedness, right? We have so many tools. We switch our context so many times. A lot of tools may not be friendly, and it creates a sense of inability to perform. And why do we blame people for tools that have been designed by engineers for engineers? I always show the example of my cell phone. I've gone through very little upskilling in starting to use it. So the more we can bring the human-centric design thinking into the workplace design, the more we'll be able to reduce that friction and reduce the sense of anxiety or inadequacy that sometimes our interaction with technology can create.
Stella, thank you so much. Thank you so much for the presentations. Thank you so much for coming in. Thank you to the people who were doing in the chat with me, exchanging ideas as we were going through that. And we're going to get serious for a moment here now, and just no, hang on. Don't get up. Don't. You read on the agenda that we're going to talk about governance, and you said, well, maybe a good time to get a snack, or I'll go to the bathroom or extend this break or something. But that would be wrong, because although I have sat through some governance presentations that the PowerPoint, the binders, the documents, the endless discussions of who owns the data, that's some people's governance. But it's not what it's about. Governance is not a contest to find out who owns or controls data. It's an active process about how we understand, how we care for, and how we manage what we say is our greatest asset, our data. You cannot get, and I think we've agreed on that today, you cannot get or sustain results without governance. You can't manage and you can't protect your data. And with the growth in privacy, security, compliance legislation, you desperately need to know how to work within those rules for your own sake, and for the sake of your company, and for the sake of the people who have entrusted you with their data. Now, to paraphrase the first Spider-Man movie, with great potential comes great responsibility. So open your mind a little and check out the next presentation on great governance and why it matters. Our speaker is Carter Cousineau. She's the Vice President Data Model and Governance for Thomson Reuters. So welcome, Carter.
Thank you.
The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for having me. The mic works, which is a good step. Perfect. So let's kick it off. Demystifying your data. And I am going to branch off a little bit. We do live at Thomson Reuters in the Head of Data and Analytics org. So we are a fun group, I'd like to think, and hopefully in the next 25 minutes around governance and ethics, I can be able to speak to some of that for both data and models, AI, machine learning, and then unleashing the whole purpose of today's presentation, unleashing those analytics with the information that you'll need and want to gather through governance. So let's kick it off with the first slide. A few fun facts. I'd be remiss if I didn't start with some data of our own, which is data-driven organizations take 6 times more likely to retain their customers. When you put actually artificial intelligence, it has been expected to increase professional workers' output by 10%. And the most innovative companies are 2.4 times more profitable. And these are some old stats here that we have from McKinsey, and I'm sure they've recently changed. But we know the value of data and analytics. And now the question becomes, how do we instill that, right? So I won't go over every bullet point here, but a few really key points. I heard from previous presenters, data really is strategic assets. That is the value and bones of our decision making and how we come to our decisions more and more in terms of organizational structures and decision makings. 5 million businesses are actively using WhatsApp to connect with customers who engage in about 65 billion messages daily. So it's beyond a part of our everyday lives. I think if our phones were to crash for a split second, our hands are tied. We're lost for words. We're lost for our next moves. So it really is a part of our everyday. And as Jim kind of mentioned, don't think of governance as the bogged down policies and standards and endless meetings, because it's not. It's not at all, actually. If you were to think of it something from an operational sense, so let's take marketing as an example. Marketing has to create a standard guideline and or principles on how to do successful, consistent branding. And once they have that, and that's where I say that's the beginning of governance, you do want those bones, that structure around policies, standards, and templates, but as soon as you have that consistency for consistent use is then when you can start to unleash the true power of governance in terms of how that fits in your organization and being agile to those ever-growing changes, and we'll go over some. Another example I did want to touch on around governance in terms of those core fundamentals before we jump to some examples around trust, and I should caveat by saying governance to me, ethics as well, I'll be speaking a lot to. Ethics is a part of the governance lifecycle for data and models. So both extremely valuable and critical to any business. But the first question I want to ask is, do you trust your data? And this is a loaded question. Here are some of the things, the preliminary questions you would want to look at when considering, do you trust your data? What is it? What is the data I'm looking at? For some organizations, you may very well know what that is. And others, we're just scratching the surface. We're not even sure what this looks like. We're not sure who it was collected for and why, but we're just about to unleash those purposes. In more mature establishments, they know their data, and they know their data very well. Why was the data collected in the first place? I love that question. Why it was collected in the first place is a really important one. When you look at past governance now, and more moving into the operational needs of your data, all of your secondary uses. So though it may have been collected for a specific purpose, there's probably far more other uses of that data, and I'm going to be touching on that throughout the presentation because I think it's an important one. What consents do you have in place? How do you know the data has been added, changed, or filtered and deleted? These are all of the changes that happen in your data lifecycle to ensure that you have the right accurate quality of data to go about making some of those decisions for the analytics and AI systems you'd like to build. Good data and AI has the ability to solve problems. I actually want to emphasize this, has the ability to help solve problems. And here's the example I wanted to pull here. COVID, our recent times have changed a lot of the ways of working. And by ways of working, it's changed a lot of our human behaviors as well. So during the pandemic, it changed how criminals hide their cash. And AI tools were trying to sniff that out. So here's an example of using AI for good. It's hard to assess the exact scale of the problem, but in the recent study that was done by MIT Technology Review, the criminals found a new way to launder their money. And this equates to about 2 to 5% of global GDP rate. So if you want to talk about value for a second, that's a lot back for the global GDP rate. That's about $800 billion to $2 trillion at current figures, ebbs and flows. That is laundered every single year. So they built an AI model to help forecast and identify some of the fraud detection in advance of that occurring. So though criminals found a new way to launder their money during the pandemic, at the same time, building AI machine learning has proven to be a societal benefit. Now the biggest question, and some of the examples I always like to pull. On the flip side, what happens if ethics is not considered in the AI system lifecycle? We'll go over a very common, the trolley problem here, which is commonly known as the ethical dilemma. This study was done by MIT Technology Group back in 2020 when it was published, but in the MIT lab in 2014. And it really brings back that ethical dilemma of should the driverless car kill the baby or the elder? The answer is no one, of course. But when you're faced in those decisions as a human, how would you behave? So they created this gamified view to better understand humans' decision-making process in that very question. What we found is that, or what MIT lab found in 2014 is that the answer depends on where you're from. So those in Asian countries selected the elder, or more frequently were to select the elder, and those in North American countries selected the baby. The reason why this is such a big question or important ethical dilemma is that when you actually feed that data into your self-driverless vehicle, how would it behave? Right? And you can see just right in the study of human behaviors, how depending on the countries or jurisdictions you're in, that behavior may be different. The decision of that model or data set for the self-driverless vehicle would be different. So there are cultural differences within our society, and we cannot neglect those. So we have to ensure our data and models and systems are fair, because that is the data that's fed into them. Another example I like to pull up, which is pretty common in terms of HR processes. So HR recruitment AI tools found gender bias in their processes. I do want to emphasize or pause here for a second that this problem actually has happened amongst several different occasions in terms of automated recruitment tooling, and it really stems back from an ethical concern. It's the historical and gender biases that were found in the system. So they were found to more frequently hire men than women. Hand sanitizer, this is a unique one. In the first versions of the hand sanitizer was not found to recognize all hands. So this is a classic or one of the image recognition problems that's been found in research. So the collection of pool of images may not have represented all hands that are to society. So many ethical untrustworthy problems stem from the data itself. This is kind of why I like to pull from some of the past examples we've learned and seen in society as a whole. The data that we collect and use is only as good as the data that we have in our models. So having that fair overall representation across the model itself is where you hear a lot of that mentality of garbage in, garbage out. Couldn't be further from the truth. Having quality data, valuable data, that is where your models and your analytics will really start to be unleashed. You'll really start to understand the sorts of data you're looking at doing. However, in many instances, the system was built with good intentions, but those checks and balances may not have been in place to properly embed throughout the data lifecycle and model lifecycle. So these are some really important factors when we look at extending past and building, using our data for different uses, especially those secondary uses. Two other quick examples is the credit card. So credit card score ratings or mortgage scores, they were found still similar in bias challenge that irrespective of the fact that you may have had a higher credit scored rating, the data that was collected and used had an unfair representation in terms of the scoring it would give amongst gender. Another piece here that I'm going to jump over is the AI in healthcare. Now, this is a big bucket of opportunity, but at the same time, you don't see the full adoption. And the question becomes, why? Despite, and the example I often like to give is the advanced research that we've seen in cancer treatments rates. So we know that there is technologies around AI that can detect cancer rates far quicker and easier than that of doctors. Why aren't they adopting? This pulls in the ethical issue or example around explainability where doctors cannot take that technology unless they fully trust it. They need to be able to trust that technology 100%, nor they will not adopt. So that's something where even though we've seen advancements, you don't actually see that curve and shift in terms of actual adoption. So there's a few examples around ethical considerations. And again, I do have to say that ethics is a part of governance, so at both of the life cycles. Now let's talk a little bit about the policy landscape globally and what we're seeing. I'll go through a couple of examples of the current landscape. In Canada, we have what is called the Canadian Directive of Automated Decision-Making in force since 2020. We also have the Canadian Artificial Intelligence and Data Act pending since 2022. When you go in and move into the states, you see different regulation that's more at the state level. So I'll just call out a couple, but New York state law on regulating the use of artificial intelligence employment decision enters the workforce in 2023. Illinois has their own, and California has unique transparency acts. If we move down to LATAM, you see they have a different regulatory environment, Brazil, Mexico, and then in APAC, we have Singapore and Australia with their unique AI acts. The reason I want to call this out, and I think it's really important, is if you look at the history of privacy, we're at that same trajectory around ethics. So privacy had a lot of different regulations that were forming in different geographic locations and regions. Of course, I neglected to mention, but GDPR is one in Europe. So we see the landscape coming around ethics. We know these ethical concepts are being established from a regulatory standpoint, but they may not be speaking commonly to one another. And that's similar to what we saw in privacy till it reached that final convergence. From a policy landscape, I expect the same trajectory. We'll see this divide or slight variance between regulation from country and jurisdiction to the point it reaches that convergence, and that will be that go forward from a global. But right now, as it stands, regulations aren't formally speaking to one another as closely tied as they could be. Now, I heard previous speakers speak a little bit about PII, so I won't go in too much detail here, but these are some of the fields in terms of personal data, PII, or also commonly known as, and then sensitive fields that may be in your organization to watch out and look out for. I want to talk about the second part of this. So you have your PII classifications and personal data tagged. Awesome, that's fantastic. In a centralized view, data cataloging, your AI registry, any register centralized view for your data model. So you have that. What I think and what most organizations are going to have to go into, and this is where I say it moves past the governance check and balance and moves into your operational effectiveness, is what else do you need to know about your data? Classifying your data aside from PII, right? So now consider from a geographic location. You'll know selfishly from my perspective, it's great. We'll know exactly where the data is being pulled from, where it's being used, and we can in turn pull that report and be able to know exactly where our data is being used should regulation come around. So meet any compliance need and you're ready to go, But on the flip side, I'm referring more from the actual operational sense. So if we're looking at our products, we're looking at our marketing, we want to know where it's used and how it's used. And if you have that line of sight, this is where you'll start to open opportunities, and your opportunities will flourish even further. The build one, use many mentality of actually, you know you've built it in this one organization. You know that type of model worked for your sales group. Why not actually take some of those parameters and build it across different verticals of your organization? So classifying your data to the degree that your organization would need it to inform your decision making is really, really critical. And it saves some of the work, which I'll go over towards the tail end. Another piece I wanted to touch on is explainability. And I talked a little bit from the healthcare sector where you could see this adoption rate really be dependent on that of being able to trust the data. From the explainability realm, there's a ton of different techniques, but it really does stem back to the type of AI machine learning model you used and the way you built out that model on the techniques you could have in place. So I won't go over them, but models can be built, of course, through image recognition, tabular data, and text, unstructured or structured. So logistical regression models, decision-making, neural networks, natural language processing, these are all AI machine learning techniques that have actual explainability means and techniques that could be done and have in place for your models. Last but never least, my nice little video to give me some sound effect behind me. Governance has a ton of components to it, some of which I've went over at a high level: classification, tagging, ensuring your data catalog is centralized, as well as your AI registry, having access to that data, test data, being able to monitor your data, monitor your models. It's important to note that governance and the concept of enterprise-wide fits under two buckets here. So you see the first one that's more of that regulatory requirements. There's a regulatory need, but then there's a flip side, which I call proactive governance. Though there might not be a regulatory need, there is reasons for your organization to have those checks and balances in place. So to be ready for those ever-growing changes. Now, what's your role in governance? We all have a role to play. The Data and Model Stewardship Network is really what fosters and brings together your subject matter experts to the table to help solve those data model issues and identify them early on. Let's focus on model governance for a second. So that's your AI machine learning side of the house. Have you ever had a model developer who has all the subject matter expertise of your model and has left the organization? How much more work is it now to be able to take that model and drive it forward, move it forward? There's so many gaps and blanks within just understanding that model because your data scientist has left. That's the value of something that seems so small or as simple as an AI registry, but actually having that line of sight for all of your models in your organization. More organically, when you move into the operating model, being able to take what you know for your data and your models and drive it forward. So good data governance really does have the ability to drive better products and solve and improve customer experiences. That's it for me.
All right. Let me get on up here. Thank you so much. I love the music. That was so cool. That was good in there. So the practicality of governance in there and how you make that work. When you go and talk to people around your company, was I exaggerating? Do you get the reaction, oh God, governance in there?
You're not wrong. It depends. It depends on any organization. I think the biggest piece, and it was kind of pulling in the previous talk actually, is where you're at organizationally in terms of educating. And educating is key. Yeah. Inconsistent use of some of these terms and just providing that consistency at the organizational level goes leaps and bounds, because once they've established that, they know the value, they see it. It supersedes actually the needs of a governance team, and operationally you become more sound.
Yeah, if you start talking about the things they're interested in. Funny how that works in there. Thank you so much.
Of course, thank you.
Great, thanks. Wasn't that great? I love that. And proof positive, you don't have to be dull in your presentations in there. You know, you can make this fun in there. So let's take a minute on that theme to enjoy another Lessons in Analytics.
ITWC presents Lessons in Analytics with analytics expert, Analytics.
Hey there.
Lesson number 4. So the business applications for your capabilities must be infinite.
Oh yeah. The stuff I pump out, I'm a pretty big deal.
I'm guessing that means you make people a lot of money?
Well, I'm a storyteller at heart. I turn data into dollars.
And how do you do that?
Well, numbers are kind of boring on their own.
Wow, that sounds sacrilegious.
I know, right? I feel dirty even saying it, but it's true. The key is the story you tell using the numbers.
Like?
Well, let's say I have a place that sells French fries. I sell 2 orders of fries, one order at 11 a.m., and then another order at 3 p.m. What story can I make from that?
You only have 2 customers?
Wrong. No. The numbers say that 50% of my sales are made before noon.
I suppose that is true.
Also, sales of my fries doubled in one day.
I see.
And if it happened to be the same customer who bought both orders that day, then ta-da! 100% of my clientele are repeat buyers.
Wow, impressive.
You try.
According to the data collected at our French fry restaurant, our customers are 100% satisfied with our pricing.
Wow. I think you have a gift.
Lesson number 4. It's all about how you frame it.
So in introducing this next thing, I just want to take the moment to give a shout out here that Forbes magazine once said that data science was the most sexy job in the world, right? Come on now. Okay, sounds fabulous, right? But over the past few years, a few of us have wondered whether data analytics was also the most dangerous job in the world. And if we really believe this, if we believe that data is the crown jewels of our organization, we realize we have the job of protecting them. And if we don't do that job properly, there are a lot of crooks out there who will steal our data. There are regulators and legislators who are out there to set laws and regulations and penalties for not using it correctly. In a very litigious world, there are those who sue our companies for enormous amounts of money in there. So much for the sex appeal of data analytics. But you would be fair to say, if you feel sort of boxed in by this, that every which way you turn, privacy and security are seen to be an obstacle. But that's not really true. Our former privacy commissioner once chewed us out on that and said, this is not an excuse. It's not an obstacle. It's what is a barrier is the lack of understanding we choose to have on the regulations and the rules that govern us. And now we don't have to be compliance experts. If you're out there saying, well, I'm not in compliance, I'm not in governance, and you don't have to be a compliance expert, but we do, all of us, need to understand the rules under which we have to operate. Like doctors wearing masks in operating rooms, or construction workers wearing hard hats. We observe safety procedures. Or if you get in your car, what do? You put on the seatbelt. We need to know what behavior is expected of us. And not so we have all the answers, but it's impossible to have privacy and protection and governance and security without our cooperation. So some of us might not have to have all the answers, but we do have to know what questions to ask. Now, Jennifer Davidson is a partner with Deeth Williams Wall. Welcome, Jennifer. And she's going to talk to us about some of the latest developments in security, privacy, and compliance as they affect us as data analytics professionals in there. And for business users, managers, and executives. Jennifer, the stage is yours.
My name is Jennifer Davidson. I'm a technology lawyer at Deeth Williams Wall. And day in and day out, I deal with the privacy and cybersecurity issues of companies that are unfortunately going through the hard times. Dealing with security and privacy essentials for data professionals, which is a bit of a mouthful, can take a lot longer than the time that we have today. But I'm going to try to leave it to the things that you need to know and the things that you need to think about. I think I'm pressing the wrong thing. There we go. Okay, so today we're going to go through a couple of things. The growing threat of data breaches, which is really about what you've got to be thinking about every single day. We're going to talk a little bit about cybersecurity attacks and the role of the lawyer in those attacks, and the need to report, which is the question that I keep getting asked. And then I'm going to leave you with a few key takeaways. So the threat of data breaches. We've got an analytics conference, so I'm going to start with a couple of key figures for you. So we're looking at between 5 and 25 million data records that are exposed worldwide each quarter. between March 2021 and March 2022, organizations are reporting that 83% of organizations are reporting that they have already experienced more than one data breach. And the average cost of data breaches have reached an all-time high of 4.35 million US. And 52% of global organizations surveyed said that they have a supply chain partner that was hit by ransomware. This is where I want to get into, supply chain, because it means that you don't just have to worry about you have to worry about everybody down the line. It's just too easy to go after the supply chain, and really, you get the most bang for your buck. I mean, you want to talk case in point, we can look at SolarWinds. SolarWinds happened in March 2020. Criminals entered into the SolarWinds backend system and inserted malware into the code. And SolarWinds, unfortunately, sent that code right on down the line to about 18,000 of their clients, which, through no fault of their own, of course, they were going through the process of sending through updates. Including in those 18,000 SolarWinds customers were 6 US government departments. I bring this up because 2 days ago they made headlines again when SolarWinds agreed to pay $26 million to its shareholders over this data breach and over the failure to actually prevent the data breach. The data breach, by the way, lasted for 9 months. 9 months before anybody figured out that all of these companies were being spied upon, including government agencies. I also want to bring Kronos up here. Back in December 2021, Kronos, which handled payroll software for thousands of companies across the world, including several of the Fortune 500, the ransomware attack ended up taking over their systems, took them down for several weeks, and all of these companies, including some of my clients, were left with payroll systems that they couldn't access, which means you've got 200, 300 employees, all who are expecting payment according to their time cards. Those time cards are gone. Thousands of dollars missing, and missing right around Christmas time, which sort of added to the nature of the response. Kronos wasn't back up again until late January. I mean, it speaks to exactly how much we have to deal with here and how difficult it is. I'm going to skip past Colonial Pipeline and go straight for this one. So as soon as a lawyer pulls up case law, everybody's eyes glaze over. It's, I'm like the tax man. It's terrible. But I want you to pay attention to this one, because this was a precedent-setting case that came out back in September. And in this case, we deal with the Insurance Corporation of British Columbia, which held the records of a compulsory insurance policy plan for all of its members. And the Insurance Corporation had obviously all the personal information of all of their insured, and one of their agents snuck online, grabbed the customer data, and sold it. Sold it to a third party. Well, police started investigating after there were a series of arsons and thefts and shootings, and found that this list was behind it all. The criminal syndicate was going through the list and actively targeting some of the affected individuals. The reason I bring this case up is because the Supreme Court in British Columbia found that the company was vicariously liable for that damage. The company. And why was the company vicariously liable? Because they didn't insert proper access controls. They had made it so that anybody within the organization had the ability to access those lists. And the court found that damage was foreseeable if everybody had access to that list. Now, one thing I want to point out is that there was training, there were privacy policies, there were a whole bunch of things that were in place, but access controls were not. And so what we're hearing from the courts is loud and clear. We need to actively protect the data, or we're going to be paying the consequences. So cyber attacks, I'm sure you've heard this before. It's not if, it's when. And I hope you never see something like this, but my clients end up seeing it all the time. Your files are locked away from you and you get something like this, and the question is, what do you do? What do you have to do? And so we get called in. And why are we called in? We get called in to be breach counsel because we deal with these things all the time, because we understand how to coordinate an investigation with proper preservation of evidence, and we try to keep it all bundled under privilege because these are things that can come out in litigation later, and there are things that you don't want to come out in litigation later. These are highly sensitive documents that are coming through, and the unfortunate thing that we end up having to deal with is if we're not called in soon enough, we can't put the cat back in the bag. The information has to be created for the purpose of getting the advice of counsel, and counsel has to be on board and be part of those communications in order to try to protect it under privilege. Unfortunately, we saw something like this with Life Labs, when Life Labs had a large breach. They didn't bring in counsel. They hired a forensic team, and the Privacy Commissioner asked for that information, and that information was not protected under privilege because there wasn't a lawyer working on the file at that time. So the next question I get, I've been hit, do I need to report? It's not a simple answer. Under federal law, you need to report if there's a real risk of significant harm to the affected individuals. How do we know what is a real risk of significant harm? Well, the test is not an easy one, and really a lot of it depends on the facts of the case. But you have to look at this from an objective viewpoint and say what could happen to these individuals based on that circumstance. And so what happens when you need to report? Who do you need to report to? Well, Privacy Commissioner, individuals, and other organizations. Now, most companies are aware that they may have to report to the Privacy Commissioner. Most companies are aware that they may have to report to the individuals. But the other organizations, that sort of sits there floating. And what does that mean? That means there may be regulatory bodies involved that you may need to report to. It may mean that you need to contact police, where there's a threat of where the threat of the threat actor is really ongoing, and reporting this would actually mitigate that harm. And what happens if I don't report is the next question. So the fines currently are an offense punishable by summary conviction, liable to a fine not exceeding $10,000, or an indictable offense. And the indictable offense can have a fine of $100,000. And that's under our current law. But things are changing, and they're changing dramatically. Back in June, there was a bill passed, a couple of bills passed, one of which was C-26. C-26, the Critical Cyber Systems Protection Act, is creating a mandatory reporting for all cybersecurity incidents for any company that is part of critical infrastructure. And you might think, okay, well, I'm not part of critical infrastructure. I don't work for the energy company. But when you look at the wording of this act, it's time to pay attention, because the supply chain comes back into effect. Everybody who's down the road from the supply chain, if they're affected, and that means a critical infrastructure is affected, then that reporting strategy, that reporting mandate comes into effect. And another reason you need to pay attention to this, contraventions of the act can incur administrative monetary penalties of up to $15 million per violation. That's worth paying attention to. Another bill that came into place at the same time in June, and keep in mind these are bills, these are not yet acts, but another bill that came into place is Bill C-27, the Digital Charter Implementation Act, and this affects every analytics professional, because you are now dealing with a new series of questions about what you are allowed to do with the data that you have. There's new rules about the collection, use, and disclosure of the data, the manner that it was collected in, the consent that you receive at the time of collection, and that organizations that are operating with AI systems, that have high-impact AI systems, have to adopt measures to identify, access, and mitigate the risks of those harms or bias outputs. This is new, and this is going to change a lot. We've got a whole lot of AI transparency coming down the line with this stuff. And then they've gone a GDPR route, and they've said that contraventions can lead to up to $10 million or 3% of the organization's gross revenues, or if they knowingly commit certain offenses, then they can face fines of greater than $25 million and 5% of the organization's gross global revenue. Again, worth paying attention to. Now, I've talked to you about federal legislation, and I've seen the eyes glaze over. But federal legislation doesn't actually cover us for what we need to know here, because there are provincial legislations as well. They don't cover everywhere. They cover Quebec, Alberta, and BC right now. But it's not enough to know what the federal rules are. If you're operating in any of these provinces, or you have individuals from these provinces that could be affected, then you need to pay attention to this legislation, because you're going to need to report in these locations as well as the federal. So we can go through each and every province, but you've got to know that they're pretty much substantially similar to the federal legislation. You just have to remember that it's only applicable to that province. But then there's Quebec. So in September 2022, Quebec decided to really bolster their privacy. And in doing so, they've created a regime that comes into place over the course of 3 years, September 2022, September 2023, September 2024. And in each of these years, they've got increasing mandates of what you need to do. So in the first iteration of this, when we're looking at September 2022, we now know that every organization that operates in Quebec or with Quebec needs to have a privacy officer. If you have not designated a privacy officer, then the CEO is automatically allocated the responsibility. It's not enough to just list them as the privacy officer. You also have to inform on contact information within your website on how to reach the privacy officer. Quebec has mandatory data breach reporting requirements, similar to the real risk of significant harm test, but this is a real risk of significant injury test. There are record-keeping obligations, which means that you've been hit, there's personal information, there's no personal information within the attack, you still have to record and keep a record of all the things that you did in response to that attack. And then there's a registration for biometric systems. Moving towards 2023, there's going to be a mandate to implement policies. Privacy policies need to be up on the website. The collection of personal information requires a legitimate and meaningful purpose, which will need to be identified beforehand. So there are increased disclosure requirements and increased methods of sharing those requirements that you're going to have to know before you're using your data in analytics. And all privacy settings, where there are privacy setting options, are going to have to be defaulted to the highest level of confidentiality. Now, you were talking earlier, Joe, about the privacy commissioner who told you that it didn't have to be difficult. I'm going to guess that she was talking about privacy by design. Yes. Privacy by design has made its way into our legislative system, and we are going to have to make sure that we are taking it up a notch. Also, before you can take data out of Quebec, you're going to need a privacy assessment. So some key takeaways. There's a lot of new privacy laws coming into play. Understand them and understand what your company needs to do in order to be able to comply, and don't leave it to the last minute. A lot of these things take a lot of time. It takes a lot of structure, and you're going to need to organize. So pay attention to it now. Make sure that you're not just cleaning up your own backyard, but you're also making sure that your supply chain partners are also protecting themselves. That means going back through your contracts, making sure that those contracts have data breach reporting and safety provisions. You need to develop policies and procedures to safeguard your privacy and the privacy of the individuals that you're working with. And please stay tuned for more developments in privacy law. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you. It was fabulous. Thank you so much. I have a question, and this is a question that always bothers me. How do we know which legislation is applicable to us in a country like this?
It's a really funny thing because it really depends on what you're dealing with. So when you're dealing with privacy, the federal privacy legislation presides over the entire country, except where there's a provincial legislation.
And so the provincial legislation can override that.
That's
but even if
right.
I'm operating
Within
in
that
Ontario,
jurisdiction.
I think what I got from you is even if I'm operating in Ontario, if I have an impact on somebody in Quebec, I still have to
Report in Quebec.
You have to report in Quebec.
And you've got to comply with Quebec law when you're dealing with Quebec residents.
Wow.
So it's not enough to just know, I'm in Ontario, my business is in Ontario, so I only need to understand what's going on in Ontario. No, you need to understand what's going on in Ontario, what's going on in Quebec, and if you're dealing with people from Alberta, if you're dealing with people from British Columbia, you need to know what's going on there too, because everybody has slightly different wording as to what they're looking for and what needs to happen, particularly when there's a data breach.
Sorry. I don't need an alarm clock anymore. Between this and security, I don't need an alarm clock. I wake up in the middle of the night screaming. But thankfully, we've got people like you to help make sense of this for us in there. And again, I think this is an important thing that we shouldn't be frightened by it. I make a joke out of it. We shouldn't be frightened of it. We should be aware of our responsibilities because we always say in security as well as you need everybody in the organization. It takes only a mistake by one person to trigger something that can have great effects on the organization. So we all have to know what we're handling is valuable and that there are rules in place about it.
Exactly.
Thanks for spelling it out for us. You've been wonderful. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. So we're going to I think we're going to have one more video in there. We're going to go back for one more Lessons in Analytics video from our creative team. And then we're going to take, I think, a 15-minute break. And for those of you who are here, if you're at home, go crack your own bottle of wine and you can listen to one of our podcasts. But for anybody who's here live, the bar is open. So we'll come back in 15 minutes after this video. Thank you so much. We'll see you soon.
ITWC presents Lessons in Analytics with analytics expert Analytics, lesson number 5. So what's the future of analytics?
How should I know?
Really? I thought your whole thing was predictive analysis.
I guess you're right. Hang on. Let me just run a quick query here, and we'll see. Bing! Here we are. Bell bottoms will make a big comeback. Wait, that's not analytics. 1 second. Taylor Swift will release another album with online sales of, hang on, airline critics, parasitics, hieroglyphics. Here we go. The future of analytics. Did you know that 90% of the world's data was created in the last 2 years? And every 2 years, that volume doubles. Great. I can barely fit into my hard drive now. That was an analytics joke.
Oh.
More data analytics will move to the cloud.
So you're moving to the cloud then?
I guess. Great views there, but the airline noise is insufferable.
That was another analytics joke?
It was.
Lesson number 5. Analytics humor isn't for everyone.
A new report on phishing, a warning of Venus ransomware, malware hidden in images, and more. Welcome to Cybersecurity Today. It's Remembrance Day, November 11th, 2022. I'm Howard Solomon, contributing reporter on cybersecurity for ITWorldCanada.com. Many advanced email attacks still successfully end with the theft of user credentials or account takeovers. That's according to new research from Tessian. The company surveyed 600 IT and security leaders in organizations across the US, the UK, the Middle East, and Africa. 71% of respondents said an advanced email attack this year at their organization resulted in an account being taken over. Among other things, 62% of respondents said advanced email threats got past even their secure email gateways and into employee mailboxes. 10% of respondents said they received over 450 email-based ransomware attempts since the beginning of the year. Speaking of email attacks, researchers at Avanon looked at patterns against the government of an unnamed country in the Western Hemisphere with a population of under 100,000. It calculates that this government sees an average of 93 phishing attacks a day. For some reason, most attacks were directed at the Bureau of Standards. Hospitals are being warned that the new Venus ransomware is circulating. That's the word from the U.S. Health Sector Cybersecurity Coordination Center. It says the strain, discovered in August, has hit at least one healthcare entity in the United States. Unsecured instances of Windows Remote Desktop Protocol are a common way these attackers get into IT systems. RDP must be put behind a firewall. Computer technical support scams, like crooks pretending to be from Microsoft, continue to victimize people. That came in a reminder this week from the FBI. Scammers email or phone potential victims demanding money to renew a software subscription. When the victim wants to cancel the so-called renewal, the crook says there's a fee and asks for the victim's bank information. Remember, any email or phone request that pressures you to act quickly is likely a scam. Never send money on the instructions of someone you have only spoken to online or by the phone. Software companies like adding features to make life easier for customers. Unfortunately, sometimes the feature may have vulnerabilities. One example is credential roaming, added to Windows 20 years ago. A Russian-based threat group used a hole in credential roaming early this year against a European diplomatic target. A new report from Mandiant goes deeply into what this problem is. Credential roaming allows a digital certificate used for access to roam with an employee. The vulnerability allows a hacker to compromise the system and gain administrative privileges. Now, Microsoft issued a patch for this in September to fix the problem. The Mandiant report details how Windows administrators can avoid or fix it. There's a link to this in the text version of this podcast. Researchers at Avast have added to the knowledge about a threat group dubbed Warrock, which hides malware in PNG images. In a report this week, Avast said the purpose of the malware is to steal data. They think that the attackers are somehow exploiting unpatched vulnerabilities called proxy shell in Microsoft Exchange servers and then uploading stolen data to a Dropbox cloud storage account. This is a good reason to make sure Exchange servers are fully patched. Another attacker is also hiding malware in images. One was found recently by researchers at Checkpoint Software in a software package in the open-source PyPy library for developers who use the Python programming language. Any developer who downloaded and inserted the package called API Color in their application would have it infected with a virus. The package has been deleted from PyPy, but it's another reason why developers who use open-source libraries have to be careful before downloading code and have it scanned before being inserted into applications. That's it for now, but later today the Week in Review edition will be available. Terry Cutler of Syology Labs and I will discuss the latest arrest of a ransomware operative, a cyber insurance settlement, and more. Links to details about podcast stories are in the text version at itworldcanada.com. You can follow Cybersecurity Today on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or add us to your flash briefing on your smart speaker. Thanks for listening. I'm Howard Solomon.
Eli Lilly's stock price succumbs to fake tweet, Twitter removes check marks from Twitter Blue, and FTX gets hacked. That's all the tech news that's trending right now. Welcome to Hashtag Trending. It's Monday, November 14th. I'm your host, Tom Lee. Eli Lilly, the pharmaceutical company that commercialized insulin almost 100 years ago, saw its stock price tank by 4.5% when a Twitter user, posing as the company's official account, falsely tweeted that insulin would be offered for free. The confusion came from the checkmark next to the account's name, which was obtained by paying $8 a month. The account did not mark itself as a parody account, a new requirement introduced after Elon Musk took over the platform. In addition to Eli Lilly, Novo Nordisk and Sanofi, two other major suppliers of insulin, also saw their stock prices drop. The previous story was just one example of how imposter accounts are taking advantage of the confusion to post bogus tweets, often posing as a brand or a public figure, such as Elon Musk. This was clearly a problem for Twitter, which is probably why he removed the system. In a tweet, Musk condemned the imposters, saying that tricking people is not okay. His backpedaling is in stark contrast to his previous stance, in which he vehemently defended the system when faced with criticism. Just when you thought things couldn't get worse for the doomed crypto exchange FTX, the company is now sandwiched between a bankruptcy filing and a hack involving around $500 million. FTX filed for bankruptcy after it couldn't raise a $9 billion rescue package. And since all of its customers are considered creditors, it will take a long time, possibly months, to sort out who's owed what. And that doesn't even include the recovery process. The hack is just salt on the wound, and no one seems to know how it happened. To many, FTX's fall from grace is still unreal. At its peak, it was the world's third largest crypto exchange. Finally, to drive home how damaging the FTX fiasco has been, one hedge fund admitted that half its capital is now stuck in the platform. Galway Capital co-founder Kevin Zhou apologized for the situation, warning that it may take a few years to recover some percentage of its assets. That's not very reassuring, but the situation is almost entirely out of their control. That's all the tech news that's trending right now. Hashtag Trending is part of the ITWC Podcast Network. Add us to your Alexa Flash Briefings or your Google Home Daily Briefing. Make sure to sign up for our daily IT Wire newsletter to get all the news that matters directly in your inbox every day. Also, catch the next episode of Hashtag Tongdons, our weekly Hashtag Trending episode in French, which drops every Thursday morning. If you have a suggestion or a tip, drop us the line in the comments or via email. Thank you for listening. I'm Tom Lee.
Lessons from cyber attacks against Ukraine, and beware of attempted extortion emails. Welcome to Cybersecurity Today. It's Monday, November 14th, 2022. I'm Howard Solomon, contributing reporter on cybersecurity for ITWorldCanada.com. Company and IT leaders need to keep reminding employees that doing foolish things leads to data breaches. They can cite the latest example. Ukraine's Computer Emergency Response Team says downloading compromised software and failing to implement two-factor authentication has led to computers in that country being encrypted by malware. The attacks, which a Russian-based threat group called Z-Team is taking credit for, starts with an employee being drawn to a fake website, supposedly with a network tool called Advanced IP Scanner. Installing the compromised tool also installs data capturing malware called Vidar. Vidar looks for passwords to steal. In this case, it found the usernames and passwords of employees at victim organizations who use the Telegram instant messaging service. If those employees didn't enable Telegram's two-factor authentication, then their credentials were captured. The attacker was then able to use those credentials to log into the victim organization through its VPN. From there, the attacker used other tools to eventually steal data and then install the data wiper. Note that there were at least two mistakes here. First, employees are tricked into downloading bad software, probably because they were emailed offers for a free version of Advanced IP Scanner. Now, note that this isn't the first time hackers have used fake versions of this application. Last month, Kaspersky warned that threat actors are distributing a similar tool called Advanced IP Spyware. The second mistake was employees not enabling two-factor authentication on Telegram. It isn't clear how, but the attackers were able to use the credentials or digital authentication tokens from Telegram to log into the VPN of victim companies in Ukraine. Perhaps a third problem was the corporate VPNs of those organizations didn't force employees to enable two-factor authentication. The bottom line is, according to the Ukrainian version of events, these attacks could have been prevented. Separately, last week Microsoft updated its October warning about a new ransomware strain hitting Ukraine and Poland. Microsoft now says a Russian-based threat group it calls Iridium is likely behind these attacks. The targets so far have been firms in the transportation and logistics sectors. Organizations around the world are getting extortion emails claiming their websites, databases, and email systems have been hacked. According to the Bleeping Computer news service, the threats are coming from a gang calling itself Team Montesano. It demands $2,500 in Bitcoin, or data will be released or sold to the highest bidder. So far, this appears to be an empty threat with no evidence that firms have actually been hacked. IT departments using the Open Lightspeed Web Server or Lightspeed Web Server Enterprise are urged to install the latest version of these applications if they haven't already done so. Patched versions were released on October 18th. I'm telling you about this now because Palo Alto Networks, which discovered 3 vulnerabilities, just published a report detailing what it found. Users of Foxit Reader for reading PDF documents should update the application to the latest version. This comes after researchers at Cisco Systems discovered 4 vulnerabilities. The U.S. Postal Service and the FBI have shut 17 websites that were used for scams. One type of scam offered people work-from-home jobs, like being a so-called logistics or quality control inspector. Another scam asked innocent victims as part of their job to reship items sent to them to another address. What they were really doing was handling products bought with stolen credit cards. Other victims were asked to buy products and then ship them to an address, but they were never given back promised money for the funds that they spent. The goods were also going to crooks. Responding to internet ads for work-from-home jobs carries risks if you don't investigate the prospective employer. Developers releasing open-source code on the GitHub platform may receive some unexpected but valuable warnings pretty soon. Messages about vulnerabilities in their code. GitHub has created a way people scrutinizing code can send private messages to developers of holes in their projects. This was announced last week at the GitHub Universe conference. The reporting mechanism is in beta now, and it's expected to be generally available early next year. And finally, Apple has released security updates for iPhones, iPads, and Mac computers. Make sure your devices are up to date. That's it for now. Remember, links to details about podcast stories are in the text version at itworldcanada.com. And that's where you'll also find other stories of mine. Follow Cybersecurity Today on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or add us to your flash briefing on your smart speaker. Thanks for listening. I'm Howard Solomon.
Joining us next is Jason Cassidy from Shiny Docs. Jason is going to talk to us about unstructured data, how to overcome the challenge and reap the rewards. Welcome, Jason.
Hey, Jim. It's really good to see you again.
Good to see you again in there. So last time I saw you, we were in Kingston. We were sharing this, and I got this idea. So thanks for joining us. But I was listening to your presentation, and by the way, never follow a better comedian. But you were great. But you were talking about this idea, and then you got into the idea of unstructured data, and I wanted to talk to you about unstructured data and how we deal with it.
Yeah, thanks, Jim, because humans are storytellers naturally, and we don't follow a predictable structure. Obviously, there is a structure to storytelling, but it's not the same as what we think of when we think of a database or traditional machine-to-machine communication. We communicate over our machines to each other visually through documents, audio, media, images, and these things become records and important information that needs to be recalled in the future. And it's just unpredictable as to where the right piece of information is going to be that you're going to need in the future, especially with the diversity of storage and collaboration tools that people are using right now every day.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of discussion about unstructured data, but I'm going to propose, and you can agree or disagree with me, Jason, but I think that a lot of our data is a lot less structured than we think. But it, as you point out, contains that unstructured data, be it stories or whatever, contains a lot of value. Now, the classic example or the classic advice I hear is, make people go back and structure it, label it, manually structure it. Is that realistic?
It's just not realistic. It's a bit of an arms race that we've lost if we think that that's the approach that we're going to take. Is that when people create information, they create it generally with a single purpose in mind. And what you're asking for there is saying people should prepare their data for a diversity of future use cases, which just isn't what they do. Like when you send a technician out to record the vibration reading on a pump, they record the vibration reading on the pump, and then perhaps them and engineers will determine what needs to be done. They're not thinking about how is it going to be recalled in the future? Might somebody get injured because of this? Are we going to make a future purchase to replace equipment? All these things that are future uses of this information is just not considered. All they know is that here's the vibration reading and now it's a record. And it's the core of why enterprise content management failed, is that people who are out there creating this information, they don't want to be deputized as records managers. They don't want to be deputized as information governors. They just want to create and consume information to do their job. So that's why myself and our company Shiny Docs, we looked outside of traditional content management in order to find solutions for this problem.
Yeah, and I love the way you said that. People don't sign up to become records custodians, or librarians for everybody else. But also that you're so right on with that is we think somehow we can predict the future, and in so many cases, the discovery of the value of information or data is something we only find by serendipity or by trying or without any ability to predict it. And so how did you get to that idea? That I understand it now, having talked to you, but what broke you out from that traditional sort of thinking to start to think in those terms?
Well, we started looking at who's doing a great job of understanding information, and it wasn't who you thought it would be. You would think it might be like Microsoft is a world leader with SharePoint and Teams. That's where a lot of people put their new information. Nobody would accuse the old players who created shared drives of being a great place to put information or email, but those tend to be the most popular spots to put this information. And people generally will just put it wherever. Like they'll put it, if we're sharing in Box or Dropbox, we might put it there. If we're sharing on Teams, we might put it there. And it just ends up, the content in the context that you need is wherever it is. So we looked at organizations like Google and said, what are they doing? Because they're the best on the planet at understanding what information is and where it is and how it relates to the intended use for people. And we asked, why aren't people doing that behind the firewall? And so we started experimenting with that about 5 years ago.
And so I have to ask you, because, and you know, I'm a bit of a fan of Shiny Docs and what you guys have been doing in there. But how do you do it? How do you cope with all of that in your applications and in your viewpoint in there?
Yeah, well, for sure. So it used to be that you would think, okay, well, our information has so little structure, it's so unpredictable that we have to move it to some place that's predictable or more structured. It turns out it doesn't work. There's just so much information in so many places that, quite frankly, it has an ecosystem associated with it. Like when you go into a big one of our customers who happen to be like oil and gas, nuclear power plants, municipalities, they've got information everywhere, and people happen to be using it where it is. So you can't say to the draftsperson, stop using the shared drive and start using some cloud system, because they'll say, no, my application works with this. So you have to go to where their content is. And that's why I invoke Google. I say, well, Google goes to where the content is. You don't build your restaurant's website on Google. It just finds it, and it knows what a menu is and all that type of thing. And it uses artificial intelligence, and it uses traditional mechanisms. It's not humans to find that information. So that's what we've designed. And we do it across huge amounts of data. Like a traditional content management system, you might migrate, let's say, 1 million documents into it. That might take you a couple of years. It'll take up your whole budget. Whereas what we do is say, no, don't do that at all. Just wherever your information is, first find out where it is, how much of it you have, and then start layering on tools to understand what the data is. And then that unlocks all the value, the ability to then manage it properly, perhaps move it to the right spot. That's how Shiny Docs has approached this. And it's taken a while for people to get the memo because, quite frankly, we're one of the first ones to suggest this. But it's becoming more and more apparent. You hear more people saying about manage in place, or they're dropping this idea of enterprise information management and put it in the right bucket in favor of different tools to understand what your data is and what the business value is.
Yeah, and I think there is this manage in place, mesh, whatever you want to call it, finding the documents where they are and not trying to artificially restructure them. I think is a fresh viewpoint, and it is something there. But how do we put this into practice? Now I know you're going to say get Shiny Docs, and that I'm not going to disagree with you on that one. But are there things that companies should do to, whether they're using your solution or not, that can help them really adapt to what is really the practical piece, unstructured data and getting data in place?
Yeah, typically people will feel good about what they know, and then they'll kind of push out what they don't know. It's like I can focus on this thing because I know how to do it, and everything else they say is just noise. But that's not the way that you have to think about your information going forward, because you never know which document you're going to need for the litigation. You'll never know which document that you're going to need to support some asset that fails. You'll never know which documents are going to get hacked and be part of the ransomware attack. You can't plan for these things. So the idea of just saying, I'm going to focus on the important thing and then forget everything else is dead. What you have to do is start off. There's 4 steps, and the first one is identify without passion or prejudice where all of your unstructured information is. Where is a document that might serve my business? Is there some in the cloud? Is there some on file shares? Is there some on shared drives? Shiny Docs, the first thing it does it automated. It's very straightforward. We're not telling you what it is yet, just where is everything? Where are the duplicates? Where are the obsolete files? Like, this is really important information as a step 0 before you do anything else. Because if you skip that step and you go straight to, well, I'm going to focus on the shared drive and make sure I get the important records out of there, you've guaranteed that you've missed everything in your email, everything on some other cloud system. Like, you have to take this omni approach first, then start identifying what the content is, and then start aligning it with your business processes. And then once you've done that and identified the business value, aligned it with the business processes, then finally you can give the content a life cycle and delete it when you need it. You can start classifying it the way that you need to. People always try to do the last thing first. They get 5% of their data done. It takes up 100% of their budget, and they succeed with 5%, but is that success if 95% is just out there and they say, well, it can't be important because I haven't looked at it? That's the weird cycle that's gone previously. So to reiterate, 4 steps. Where is everything? Second step, what is everything? Third step is, how does it align with my business process, and what business value does it have? And then the last step is, what life cycle can I then give to it? How do I manage it? And if you do that out of order, unfortunately, you're not going to get everything. And what you don't get is the most expensive piece that's going to bite you.
Jason, every time I talk to you, I learn something. And people who know me, I'm a slow learner, but I can learn that. So don't get those out of step, and get those 5 steps right in there. Great stuff in there. Can I ask you one more question?
Yeah,
this is
sure,
something you've worked on for a long time. What's next for us?
So at some point in the future, people are just going to click save. You're going to create that story, that knowledge, that media that you create, and the machines will do the rest. It'll securely share it. It'll identify the personally identifiable information and protect that information. It'll give your content the life cycle that it needs to. That's what we're building. There's lots of big organizations out there trying to build artificial intelligence. Others, we all want to get there. But before my vision and that vision can become reality, we need to just do the basics really well. That means bring all of the unstructured and structured data together to fuel your business. We can do that right now. And until you take those 4 steps, you will never get to that, that supercomputer vision where all you have to do is click save and everything happens just right. We'll never get there unless you start at the right start. So that's my plea to everybody, is start by understanding where and what your information is, and let everything else flow from there, because I want to realize that vision that the end user will not have to think about it. They just create that story that they want to in the media that they choose, and the machines will take over. But we can't get there until we've really harnessed where people are storing the information, what are they doing with it, and what the business value is.
Jason, thank you so much. Great to see you again, and hope to see you in person soon and share that glass of wine.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks a lot, Jim. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks. All right. That was Jason Cassidy from Shiny Docs, and like I said, a great thinker in this area, as well as someone. And so, if you missed this, you follow what he's talking about. You can get a replay of this, I think in about a day and a half. You can come back in the same credentials. You can share this with your friends in there, and you can watch that again, so you don't get the 5 steps out of place in there. Now, we talked about a lot of things today: skills, tools, regulations, people, culture. But there's one more thing that we have to talk about before we can get the benefits of our analytics programs. We can have all the answers, we can have all the insight in the world, but remember, we cannot influence people's behaviors, and without that, we have nothing. We need not only to have the data, the answers, the insights, and all that, but we have to put them together in a way that people will listen, and they'll remember, and they'll act. And I've been through countless sessions about this, and the idea of how do we do this? Well, you tell stories. When I was taking presentation training years ago, one of the instructors told me what was going to happen after I did this. I thought, brilliant presentation. Not an ego here, but I thought it was brilliant. And I had the graphs, and I had the story right, and I had the supporting data. And he said, how much do you think people are going to remember from that in a day or two? I figured a lot. I had no idea. One thing, he said. One thing. If you're really good, he said, looking at me as if I wasn't, shot my ego again, but he said, if you're really good, 2 things. Well, I checked the research later, and guess who's right? I thought of all the presentations I'd seen, and if you actually think about this yourself, with my experience in there, how much do you remember? So this is just stunning. How do you get across? Because it's easy to say, put it in one thing, put it on one slide. That's garbage. We've got complex ideas and data and learning and things that we need to share. Remember all that? Stories. People have been doing this for years, ages, in fact, since the earliest time. People remember stories, and stories allow us to pack an incredible amount of data into something that is rememberable. So if you want to win people over or get them to remember things and you want to get them to do things and be inspired, tell a story. No. You tell a story to communicate information to a broad audience, to the C-suite, to the board of directors, to the corporation itself, to the people who are leading the change and working on this, the employees who are implementing it. You know, and so how do you do that? You can learn it. The next session is going to offer you some insights on that, and I urge you to pay close attention to this, because if you can turn data and analytics into a compelling narrative that will inform better decision-making, you can help drive change. Joining us today is Emma Werlo. She's the Senior Vice President of Research and Data Insights from Shift Paradigm. Emma, come on up, and you're going to wrap up the day with telling us how to tell stories. Good stuff.
Thank you. Okay. Before I start, I'm going to give you a very brief introduction to Shift Paradigm, because as you heard, that's the company I come from. We're a relatively new name in the Canadian marketplace. We came together as a merger of three companies, and a year ago we became Shift Paradigm. And the three companies were a company that I founded 20 years ago called Data Insight Group, who specialized in helping people use their data most effectively, as well as an organization called Trendline Interactive, who were very well respected for their email production and consulting services around complex email campaigns, and LeadMD, a marketing technology and revenue acceleration strategy firm who have done some amazing work in that area. So we brought these companies together, and our mission is to help sales and marketing teams work together through solutions rooted in data, in technology, strategy, and others. So I just wanted to give you just a brief introduction in case you wondered who I was and why I was here. So we've heard a lot about storytelling today. It keeps coming up. So my original question at the top here is, why are we talking about storytelling at an analytics conference? I think you've already heard a couple of the answers to that, in that I think even though this is a conference sponsored by an IT company, and it is a topic that doesn't sound like it should be about stories, we've shown that, you know, fundamental to data-driven decisions is that organizations who are successfully using data to drive their decisions are among our most successful. Couple of examples here. Obviously, we all know that Google uses data a lot, but I'll give you an example of one of the ways that Google has used data for decision making. They've used data to improve their HR practices. They've taken a sample of 10,000 or a study of 10,000 of their managers and analyzed them for competencies that were most likely to yield positive reviews for their management. They mined the data of those performance reviews, and they found that a list of competencies for high-performing managers, and they created training programs specifically to meet the needs of their managers in the future. And they were able to raise their favorability scores for their managers quite significantly as a result. Disney. Anyone who's been to a Disney park in the last number of years has probably heard of a magic band. Disney uses a magic band, which is a bracelet that everybody who visits a park wears, that contains vast amounts of information because it tracks the user across the park. It's used as your hotel room key, and it is used as your payment method for things. It's used as your ticket to get into the park. What they use it for is a lot of things, but one of the things they use it for is for park logistics and customer experience. So what they've been able to do in real time is look at the data and decide if they need to deploy new tactics in order to move people around the park. So if they notice that a lot of people in one area of the park, they are perhaps long lineups in that area of the park for the rides, they do things to move people around. They might literally send out a parade in the middle of the park that drives half the people following the parade into another area of the park. So they're able to use the data they collect to really drive real-time decisions about how they run their parks. Yeah, it's just, you know, these are the kind of things people are doing to drive decisions. Loblaw, closer to home. The PC Plus program, again, uses a lot of data to offer customers tailor-made offers. One of the decisions they made, apparently, about this, and I have no personal information about this, it's just a story I read, but one of the decisions they made was when they started out the PC Plus program, in order to design the program, they had thought that they were going to use segmented offers. And they use segments, I'm sure, for lots of things, but they thought they were going to use segmented offers. But what they discovered very quickly was when they analyzed the data, they discovered that no two customers are alike. One person buys the big box of bran flakes, one person buys corn flakes. Even though they might be in the same family-centered segment, they're not the same. And so they ended up making the decision to make the program much more customized and tailored as a result of the data that they had. So those are just a few examples of how people are using decisions in data. So why then are so many companies still making decisions based on the gut. Still very much the case in many organizations, we're still making on the gut. We heard today some of those reasons. We heard about data quality and trust. People don't trust the data, therefore they're not going to use it to make a decision. They might see some results and go, yeah, but I don't think we collected that data in the right way. I don't think I trust it. In some cases, it's capabilities. Either the decision makers themselves don't have the data literacy to be able to interpret what they're seeing, or the analysts themselves aren't able to derive enough insights that are helping people make decisions. In other cases, it's just because we've always done it this way. It's cultural resistance. But we know that fundamentally, no decision maker is going to use data if they can't access it and understand it. And that's where storytelling comes in. So let me start by telling you a little story that came from a book called Made to Stick by Dan and Chip Heath. Dan and Chip Heath, I believe it was Chip Heath, is a professor at Stanford. And he did an experiment with some of his students. He asked all of his students to stand up for 1 minute each and give a presentation. They each gave a short presentation, and I think there were maybe 8 students. Each gave a short presentation. He asked everybody to rate the presentations, and then he said, okay, I'm just going to show you a video. So he distracted the students, thinking that part of the exercise was over. After a very short video, maybe it's 10 minutes later, he asked the students to each write down everything they remember about the presentations they just heard. So what did Jim say? What did Fred say? He literally asked them to write down everything they could remember. Because he said, it's only been 10 minutes, we should be able to remember. And probably you won't be surprised to find out that they were very surprised by how little they could remember. Very little indeed. And this is what they actually learned. They noticed that on average, every student who spoke used about 2.5 statistics in their presentation. So they said, 80% of people do this and 20% do this. And only 1 in 10 of them told a story. So maybe there were 10 presentations, not 8, but yeah. That's what they called the speaking statistics. But when they looked at what people remembered, the opposite happened. That the students 63% of the students could remember a story, only 5% could remember any one statistic. If you think about the privacy presentation we just had, I'm going to guess most of you remember $25 million fines. You don't remember Bill C, whatever it was, or we don't remember those things. We remember the stories that are kind of hit us in that kind of compelling way. Stories have the power to help people understand and bring data to life. So what makes a good story? So we all remember the fairy tales of our youth and the various things that we've always heard. The rules that applied when Cinderella was written are the same kind of rules that apply to storytelling today. Essentially, stories have 3 main components to them. We start with our setup. Once upon a time, there was a young girl who lived with her ugly or mean stepmother and her ugly stepsisters, and was working to the bone. And then we have a build-up. We basically tell the story through a series of facts or information that leads us towards our ending. So Cinderella had a visit from a fairy godmother. She went to the ball. She danced with the prince. She had to run out at midnight. She lost her shoe. The prince was looking far and wide for her across the country. And so all these steps lead us to the big payoff, the big conclusion, which is that the prince finds his princess and they live happily ever after. So that's a story. That's a way we know to tell a story. We all tell stories that way. But we forget to do that when we're thinking about data. And these same principles apply to analytic storytelling. When we think about our analytic story, we still have to think about what is the setup? How do we build to the conclusion? And what is the conclusion? And so, we might tell the story that says the setup might be, we notice we have a problem with customer churn. We want to figure out what to do about it. And the build-up might be, initially we'd heard that the hypothesis was that we were losing our older customers. So we looked at our age cohorts and we found out that in fact we weren't. The churn was about the same across all the cohorts. So then we looked at our channels of acquisition and we noticed that we were losing more of our online acquired customers. So then we dug a little deeper and looked at which offers those customers were getting, the ones that were churning. And so we build the story along the way. As we do it, we look at only the facts that help us build to the conclusion or help us refute the things that'll take us off track. So sometimes we have to help people stop going down the wrong road. We want to keep them on the road they're on. And then we end up with our conclusion or our recommendations. And so in this case, we might say we're recommending we remove the 2-for-1 offer off the website because these customers cost us more money than it costs to service them, and 90% of them leave after the first year, whatever that might be. So we build the story to take us to the conclusion so that the people understand what they're trying to get to. As Kimberly said, it's all about knowing what problem we're trying to solve. So I have a picture here of a woman at the top of the stairs, because when I was a young woman, my mother was probably my age, and she used to often get to the top of the stairs and call down and say, "Emma, what did I come up here for?" And analysts do this all the time. We get excited, we get some data, we have a problem we think we're going to solve, we think we're working on a problem, and then we get all excited because each time we look at our data, it takes us down a new avenue. And sometimes those avenues are helping us get to where we want to get to. And sometimes they're taking us off course. And from an analytic point of view, it's all useful, right, to find out where we need to go. But when it comes to the storytelling, when it comes to the story we need to tell, we need to remember why we came. We need to make sure that we're thinking about what is it that we are supposed to be answering, and make sure that's what our first focus is of our story. Because too often we go, well, we did this and we did this and we did this, and we look at all these other things and we don't remember why we came. Analytics visualizations can tell stories too. But sometimes, again, we lose track a little bit of why we came. And we tend to get really excited about the analysis we've done and about the neat things we can do. Sometimes we get really excited about the way we can present the information, and we think we've done something really cool and neat. Anyone ever looked at a Sankey diagram? Interesting, can be really useful, but also can be really confusing if you don't have the right application for it. The term on the top of this page is MEGO, or MEGO, and MEGO stands for my eyes glaze over. And that's how a lot of people feel when an analyst does a presentation. They get there and they think, oh my God, will they ever stop? Because we got so much to tell them and we're so excited about it. And one of the things that I love about working in analytics, and one of the things I love about working with analysts, is that we're passionate about the stuff we do. We love getting into the data. We love to share what we've learned. But we have to ask ourselves, what does the audience need to know? And they actually don't care how much work we did. As much as that hurts us to know that, they don't care how much work we did. They just need to know what the answers and what it means for them as a business. And so we have to make ourselves think about it that way. So before you write a story, so we talked about the setup and the build-up. Before you do that even, before you start the story itself, you need to think about some of the components of the story, or the components of who you're talking to and what you're doing. The key factors to consider. Who is our message for? Who am I telling this story to? Is it my senior executives? Is it my marketing department? Is it my, the folks that I am doing some analysis for in my school parent council because they want to know something about the growth of the school? Who is my audience? What are the key takeaways I want them to remember? So Jim said most people only remember 1 or 2 things from a presentation. We have to figure out what those things are we want them to remember from our presentation and make sure that we keep that in mind as we build our story. How do you want them to feel? So that number, that 25 million number, scared us. And that was what it was intended to do. I mean, I'm not sure she'd say that, but that's, in a way, that when you tell a story, you're going, oh, I better pay attention to this now because it's a scary big number. Some cases we do want people to feel alarmed. Sometimes we want them to feel happy. We were really successful in our last campaign. We want everyone to pat themselves on the back at how well we did. Sometimes we just want them to know that we've got it, that we're going to educate them, that we're going to show them what we've learned, and they need to know we've got it. But we need to be clear what we're trying to convey in order to build a good story. Because without that, we won't build a good story. And the final thing is, Jim has mentioned this a couple times today, so I'm going to reiterate it. What do we want them to do? Because unless they do something with the data and analytics we're using, we haven't actually done our job. Nobody hires analysts so that they can get nice numbers and pretty pictures and great dashboards. They actually hire analysts so they can make decisions and use that information to propel them forward. And if we haven't managed to get them to do that, and if we're not thinking what we're trying to get them to do, we're not going to get there. So let me give you an example. In March of 2020, and I apologize for using a COVID reference, but I find it's an interesting one to use. In March of 2020, the Imperial College in London, with the WHO and the global infectious disease scientists, did an exhaustive look, country to country, at all of the data around the projected impacts of COVID and what impact various mitigation measures could have. Staying home, wearing masks, all the different things that we all had to do. So they gathered a lot of data. They built a very large spreadsheet with all the information and data, and then they need to figure out what to do with it. So one of the things that what they did was they went to Science magazine and they published a great report. So I'm not the scientific audience, and maybe the scientific audience love these complex visualizations, but I got to tell you, even as an analyst, I found them a bit confusing. I have no idea what it was trying to say. Fortunately, so I would say my eyes glazed over, as we've talked about. But fortunately, there was a 10-page paper to actually illuminate the story. And in Science magazine, people are probably willing to read that paper. But the messages that were contained in this paper really need to reach a much larger audience than the few people who read Science magazine. No offense to Science magazine, but I'm guessing it's not as big an audience as we needed. So the CDC took that information, and they wanted to build a data story. They wanted to use a visualization that would help tell the story of what we needed to get from that 10-page paper. And so they built a visualization that looked like this. Okay? The audience for their visual was probably the average North American, and probably some doctors and health professionals as well. The message was saying that without protective measures, so the picture shows if you had protective measures, here's the healthcare system capacity. Without protective measures, here's the peak that we're going to hit too soon. Simple picture, which told a lot. They used color, they used very simple word placement to tell the story that they needed to tell. They didn't have 10 pages of report, they had a simple story. They took the numbers off the graph, they made it simple. And they made an image that people could understand. And so great stories also have to meet these three criteria. They have to be impactful, which again is about getting the user to do something. They need to be memorable. We need to be able to tell someone at the water cooler what we learned. We want people to go to work the next day and tell their friends about what they heard about this and why they should do what they're asking to do. And the third one, which is a little bit different than what we talked about so far, is they also need it to be personal. People relate to stories about people. Even when we are perhaps reading a story that has an animal as a protagonist, we usually ascribe that animal human characteristics because people like to hear about people. And so typically a good story is one that has a human aspect to it. So when I think about this one, it has a human aspect for lots of reasons. But if you look at this little tweet that accompanied it, which I'll read you the last line of this tweet. In this tweet, Drew really connects it to a human experience and allows us to really get the message of this. So he says it's the difference between finding an ICU bed and a ventilator or being treated in a parking lot tent. And when you hear that, and when you think about that, you think about your loved ones, you think about your grandparents, you think about the fact that you want them. You remember that scene in Grey's Anatomy where everyone's in the parking lot running around like crazy things and the interns are trying to, give people tracheotomies? You don't want that. You want them to be safely tucked away in the ICU bed. And so because just that simple phrase accompanied by this picture humanized it, we know what we need to do. And again, I'm not trying to be political here, and there are lots of people who may not agree with all this, but that was what they wanted to do was convey this message, and I believe it's a very compelling way of doing it without even a lot of words. Just in simple visuals, they were able to compel this message. So, wouldn't be a good presentation with an Einstein quote. I like this quote from Einstein, which says, if I only had 1 hour to save the world, I'd spend 55 minutes defining the questions and only 5 minutes finding the answers. That's my favorite thing about analytics, is I think that's a really important message for analytics. But today I'd like to add to it. I'd spend the next hour figuring out how to tell everyone what I found out. Okay. I'll leave you with one final quote, which is that facts don't persuade, feelings do, and stories are the best way to get at those feelings. So that's all I had to say today.
Fabulous. Thank you so much. I put you in a tough position to
End
wrap
of the
up
day.
a long day with a lot of great people in it.
A lot of great content
and you
came
knocked it
before
out.
me.
You knocked it out of the park.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm
You're
going to remember that in this as we go through this. By the way, I was a former consultant, so I would have spent the hour solving the problem, an hour telling me I would have billed them for 3.
Yeah.
Just kidding, just kidding. Little consulting joke out there. Thank you so much.
You're most welcome.
Thank you so much for wrapping up this day with us. And you got to come back for my podcast. We
Deal.
have to talk more. Okay.
Okay.
Great. Thank you. All right. That's the show. I have an enormous amount of takeaways. I put some of them into the chat today, and I'm just going to do this from memory as we went through this. But we picked out a lot of things, and I think the thing that we all agreed on was that what we were looking for was not data or charts. We're looking for insight that leads to action. And if we did nothing else but get that across today, then we did our job. Insight that leads to action. And I don't minimize the amount of work, the data, the structure, the governance, the things that have to go in there. But I think what we have to understand is, I started out the day talking about magic, but we're really talking about real life. We're talking about offering things of value to people. Find a problem that they want to solve in there. Work on small victories. Understand that your governance is not a presentation or a PowerPoint or a rule book in there. It's embedded in your culture. It's what you believe. It's how you act. And those things are the most important in there. And the other piece of this is that we really do need to show leadership. And that's a difficult thing. I do a great podcast series on leadership. One of the things I've learned from doing that podcast is we're all leaders. We all have a time when we need to step up and help move things forward. It's not something we leave for somebody in the sky. And one of the reasons why I want to do this Analytics Unleashed and make it dedicated to results was I've heard so many times people sitting around, I started this session, the last session with a glass of wine, but the favorite wine is, we need leadership. We need better. You know something? We need to get out there, solve problems that people need solved, and they will follow us. Because if you're leading and you look behind you and nobody's following you, you're not leading a parade. You're just out for a walk. I'd love to hear what you have to say. That's my little speech on this. Please put it into the chat or into Twitter with hashtag Analytics Unleashed in there, and that will be much appreciated. We want to learn from each other. We want to keep the conversation happening in there. Thanks to our sponsors. Thank you, Informatica, SAS, Shiny Docs, the people who believed in this program, who paid for it and made it happen. Thank you to the Canadian Information Processing Society in there, so and their support for this, for all the professionals in that organization who are participating in this, and thank you to our audience, to you out there, in there, and not hang on, I missed one. Thank you to all our presenters. And some of them are still in the audience, and the people who did the panels and things like that. You gave so much of your professional information, real-time information, experience, and you've been most generous in that. And then I'll go, thank you to you. Thank you to the people who watched this, who've come to this and listened to it, and participated in the chat and all that stuff. So let's keep this conversation going. If you want to share this, there will be replays of this. We will probably have, probably in a day and a half or so, we'll have that up on our websites, and you can go back and take a look at anything you want to see. Share it with your friends. Send them a link. Share it. If they register, they can see the event just the same as you can in there. And you can send them to the site analyticsunleashed.ca or to itworldcanada.com and look under events. Share it with your friends. Real friends help friends get results from data. We're going to have a lot of stories on itworldcanada.com for sure, and in some of our other publications, Direction Informatique in French in there. Feel free to share those with your friends as well. Finally, I just want to say one thing. This is something that's been a passion for me to put this event together, but this is not just an event. It is a community coming together, and we will be meeting in different places through the year, sharing information through the year, and hopefully helping each other to get better at what we do, which is getting results, getting the magic from data. Love to hear your comments. We'll send out a feedback form to you over the next couple of days, and please tell me what you thought, tell me what you liked, tell me what you didn't like, or just say hi. And join me every week on #Trending, the weekend edition. We have an interview on some subject. A lot of them are about data. A lot of them are about other issues in IT. The practical application of what we're trying to do in there. And that's it. One last thing. I'm Jim Love, CIO of IT World Canada. On behalf of all of us, the crew who made this all possible, and the people who worked so hard to bring this event around, have a great night. Thank you very much. All the best.